Chapter 50. At this time, the night breeze was blowing gently, and the summer heat was not over yet. The car drove through the long street, and the street lights flashed with a bleak white light, dividing the darkness into several strands. The darkness was like a beast with its mouth wide open, and the wheels were rolling, driving on the wild path of no return. The noise of the day left behind trash everywhere, and the sound of plastic cracking could be heard as the wheels ran over it, and then disappeared into the endless silence. Lao Gua! Lao Gua! Song Jiwen's shout seemed to come from the void, and finally woke Poplar Fruit up from his daze. Yang Gua shook her head, which was in so much pain that it felt like it was splitting apart. She finally woke up. She looked around and found that he was holding Chi-Chi in his arms and sitting in the back seat of the car. Song Jiwen focused on driving, and from the rearview mirror, he glanced at Poplar Fruit's eyes and said, "Lao Gua, you have to pull yourself together quickly. No matter what happened to make you drink so much, you have to pull yourself together now. Kiki needs you." "Yes, Kiki." Poplar Fruit suddenly understood. He lowered his head and touched Kiki's forehead. It seemed to be boiling hot, and it felt even hotter than before. Kiki's breathing was very rapid, but it sounded like her breath was much weaker than before. He had to do some artificial cooling for her. Poplar Fruit first undid a few buttons on Kiki's chest so that the clothes would not strangle her neck. He looked around, and finally his eyes fell on his clothes. He bent down and took off his t-shirt, then took out a bottle of mineral water from the storage space behind the seat, unscrewed the cap, tilted the bottle, and poured the mineral water on his clothes. Too much, Poplar Fruit estimated. The clothes were pure cotton, so they were more absorbent, and now the water was dripping out. Poplar Fruit unscrewed the cap with one hand, and stretched the clothes out of the car window with the other hand, and gently squeezed out the excess water. Recalling the books he had read before, Poplar Fruit took the wet clothes and wiped Kiki's chest, palms, and armpits. He also wiped her slightly red face, and then folded part of the clothes and spread it on Kiki's forehead. "Mosquito, drive faster." Poplar Fruit found that his voice was as dry as sandpaper. He quickly picked up the mineral water and drank a mouthful, but the residual taste of the beer in his mouth was washed away by the mineral water, and it all merged into the water. Poplar Fruit felt like he was going to vomit. "I can't vomit. Now is not the time." Yanggwa drank 2 more mouthfuls before she managed to suppress the churning gastric juice. "Soon. We'll be there in a minute," Song Jiwen said. After another block, the entrance of the 3rd Provincial Hospital was in sight. Poplar Fruit was burning with anxiety. He directed Song Jiwen to drive straight in, around a building, and into the pediatric center. Before the car came to a stop, Poplar Fruit jumped out. He didn't bother to put on the t-shirt he had used to cool Kiki's head, and just like that, he carried Kiki shirtless and rushed to the building. Song Jiwen quickly stopped the car, turned off the engine, took out the key, and followed from a distance. How fast was Poplar Fruit? Poplar Fruit didn't know, but the distance between him and Song Jiwen was increasing. He rushed into the building like a gust of wind and crashed into the office of the doctor on duty. "Doctor, save my daughter." Poplar Fruit leaned against the door and shouted with a trembling voice. The doctor sitting in the chair saw that Poplar Fruit was not properly dressed and knew that the situation might be more urgent. He quickly stood up and ordered Poplar Fruit to carry Kiki to the bed. He picked up the receiver and walked over. Poplar Fruit looked at the doctor fiddling with Kiki's arm and the receiver pressing back and forth on Kiki's chest. He was nervous and asked anxiously, "Doctor, how is my daughter now? Her fever won't be serious, right?" He said regretfully and worriedly, "Yesterday, I took her to eat some sugar pills. Could she have contracted polio? It can't be that disease." Poplar Fruit put his hands together and prayed to the gods and Buddhas. He didn't believe in any religion, but now he took turns to pray to Jesus, God, Buddha, and other deities. "Shut up." The doctor raised his head angrily and glared at Poplar Fruit, who was as long-winded as Tang Sanzang. Okay, I won't talk." Poplar Fruit quickly covered his mouth. The doctor picked up a thermometer and put it under Kiki's armpit. Then he pressed Kiki's chest and lungs. At this time, Song Jiwen hurried over. He opened the door and looked at the situation in the room. He whispered to Poplar Fruit, How is it? Still checking, Poplar Fruit whispered. He rubbed his temples, and his head still hurt a little. After a while, the doctor raised his head and said, "The child has a fever caused by a cold and cough. Originally, a fever wasn't very serious, but you delayed it a little too long. Now the child's body temperature is too high. It's already 39 degrees. It's already 7 degrees Celsius. I have to give her an emergency cooling treatment first." "It's not polio, thank God." Poplar Fruit breathed a sigh of relief. However, the doctor's words made Poplar Fruit's heart jump again. He asked worriedly, "High body temperature. Will this cause any bad consequences?" "It's hard to say. The severity of the fever has little to do with the temperature. Some children will have problems even if their body temperature is less than 39 degrees. The doctor paused and felt that his words were a little too serious. He quickly comforted him. "Don't worry. It's not necessarily that serious. We still have to observe further." Poplar Fruit's eyes were red. Looking at Kiki lying unconscious on the hospital bed, his heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. "It's all my fault." Poplar Fruit's heart was full of regret. If he hadn't been so drunk and didn't notice Kiki's abnormality, things wouldn't have turned out like this. Drinking makes trouble. Drinking makes trouble. Poplar Fruit, you get into trouble every time you drink. Why haven't you learned your lesson? Kiki is blessed by God. She'll be fine. Don't worry. I'll go register first." Song Ji-win patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder comfortingly and walked out. The doctor poured alcohol and warm water into the beaker. Then, he used a small pair of tweezers to pick up a ball of cotton and wet it. Then, he used his gloved hand to wipe Kiki's neck from top to bottom. He only stopped when the skin was slightly red. Poplar Fruit bit his lower lip and looked at Kiki, who was at the mercy of the doctor. He prayed silently in his heart, hoping that Kiki would be able to get through this safely. He hoped that all of this was just a false alarm. Using the same method, the doctor also wiped Kiki's armpits and groin. Under the influence of alcohol, Kiki's twisted expression finally eased a little. Her skin also regained some color. "Is it better?" Poplar Fruit anxiously asked. "It seems that the situation is a little better now, but you still need to take some medicine." The doctor nodded slightly, but his expression didn't relax. Seeing this, Poplar Fruit couldn't let go of the stone in his heart. When Song Ji-win came back, the doctor prescribed a pediatric drip and asked him to go to the pharmacy to get it. Poplar Fruit stayed by Kiki's side. He didn't want to go anywhere. He touched Kiki's forehead with his hand. He felt that it was a little better than before, but he wasn't sure. He had to ask the doctor for a thermometer and check it again. 39.2 degrees Celsius. It was indeed a little better than before, but it was still above the dangerous line. Poplar Fruit half squatted on the ground and leaned against the hospital bed, looking at Kiki worriedly. Song Ji-win took the medicine and the doctor fed it to Kiki. Then, he said to Poplar Fruit with a pleasant expression, "We still need to observe for 2 more hours. You guys sit down first." Poplar Fruit turned to Song Ji-win and said, "Mosquito, why don't you go back first? You still have to work tomorrow." Song Ji-win shook his head and said, "It's okay. I'll talk to the leader tomorrow. It doesn't matter if I go later. There aren't many things to do today." "Then you go sleep on the bench in the corridor. I'll stay here." Poplar Fruit pointed outside. Song Ji-win looked at Kiki and nodded. "Okay, call me if you need anything." He walked to the bench in the corridor, leaned his head against the back of the chair, covered his clothes, and began to sleep. Tonight, Song Ji-win was too tired. He had just slept for less than 2 hours when he was woken up by Poplar Fruit. Then, he ran around for so long that he couldn't even open his eyes. The doctor shook his head and moved a stool for Poplar Fruit so that Poplar Fruit could sit by the bed and watch. Although Poplar Fruit was not much better than Song Ji-win now, he resisted the sleepiness and checked Kiki's temperature from time to time to see if it had dropped a little. Originally, the doctor was supposed to check her temperature every 15 minutes, but Yanghua volunteered to take over the doctor's job. He personally put the thermometer on Chi-Chi's wrist. When he picked up the thermometer, he had to check it first before handing it to the doctor. But all of this couldn't alleviate the guilt in Poplar Fruit's heart. If he hadn't ignored the symptoms of Chi-Chi's cough from the start, If he had paid more attention to the changes in Chi-Chi's body temperature from the start, if he hadn't been so drunk that he sent Chi-Chi to the hospital with a severe fever, then Chi-Chi wouldn't be lying on the hospital bed unable to move like she was now. You're not a competent father at all. Poplar Fruit scolded himself in his heart. He was so obsessed with love that he actually left his daughter to drink to drown his sorrows. Was this what a father should do? There were so many women in the world. Why did he have to hang himself on a tree? It's really Dad's fault. Poplar Fruit blamed himself in his heart. Dad shouldn't have been so stupid. I shouldn't have left you alone. Poplar Fruit swore in his heart that as long as Kiki could recover and return to her previous loving and smiling self, he would definitely not be moved by that woman's matters in the future. Let bygones be bygones. There was no need to be obsessed with the people that he couldn't get back. He would never drink like that again in the future. Poplar Fruit thought bitterly. He had gotten drunk twice in his life. The first time, he had caused the death of Wu Yu and gave birth to Kiki. The second time, he had caused Kiki to fall into a dangerous situation. No matter what, he would definitely not touch alcohol in the future if he could avoid it. Perhaps Poplar Fruit's prayers were effective. When the sky turned white, Kiki's fever finally subsided. Although her eyes were still a little dazed, the moment Kiki opened her beautiful eyes, Poplar Fruit collapsed on the chair in joy. After the doctor's examination, Kiki was now a little weak, and her forehead was still a little hot, but other than that, there were no major problems. Because Kiki had to go home to drink milk to replenish her energy, the doctor also agreed to let her leave the hospital. Poplar Fruit woke up Song Ji-won, went through the formalities, and went home. The sun slowly rose, and the golden sunlight sprinkled over the entire city. Cars drove past, and the streets gradually became denser. The noise through the car windows seemed particularly lively at this time. Poplar Fruit lowered his head to look at Kiki, who couldn't help but be mentally tired and closed her eyes to sleep. His cheeks that had been stiff for a night revealed a bright smile. Look at this delicate and beautiful little face. Kiki, you're not a fairy, but you're definitely Dad's little fairy. Chapter 51. When they got home, Song Ji-won said goodbye to Poplar Fruit. He went back to his room to take a shower, change his clothes, and go to work. Poplar Fruit, who hadn't slept all night, didn't immediately lie down in bed. He still had to make food for Kiki. Before he left, the doctor reminded him that the child was seriously ill and weak. He had to keep up with the nutrition, or it would be easy for her to get sick again. So, although he was mentally tired, Poplar Fruit still hummed a song to boil water and make milk powder. Kiki was getting better, and his complicated emotions from last night had long been thrown to the back of his mind. Now, no matter what he saw, it was full of positive energy. The doctor told him that a baby having a fever wasn't a bad thing. A fever was actually a normal immune reaction, a normal phenomenon when the human white blood cells fought against bacteria. Poplar Fruit was worried that Kiki's fever would damage her brain, but this idea was actually unscientific. Because to be precise, a fever wouldn't damage the brain or lower the IQ. The real cause of such a consequence was actually a concurrent disease like encephalitis or meningitis. In general, parents didn't need to be too worried about a normal fever. They couldn't just reduce the fever because it might affect the normal function of the white blood cells. Of course, they couldn't let their guard down because if the temperature exceeded 41 degrees, the possibility of the child contracting bacterial meningitis or septicemia would become very high. And if the temperature exceeded 42 degrees, the proteins in the body's cells might undergo irreversible changes, causing serious damage. However, very few fevers could reach such a high temperature, so there was no need to talk about fever. The best way to deal with a fever was to let the child rest more. Of course, parents also had to pay close attention to the child's temperature and changes in complexion. When resting, the environment should be kept quiet, the room temperature should be suitable, and the child should be covered with a quilt, but not too tightly. As long as the child rested well, the immune system in the child's body would do well, and the fever would slowly subside. When the temperature of the water cooled down, Poplar Fruit didn't stay idle. He picked up the scattered wine bottles in the living room one by one, put them in a bag, and put them next to the trash can. He would throw them away when he went down. Then he swept and mopped the floor to destroy the evidence. The room was filled with the smell of alcohol. Poplar Fruit opened all the curtains to let the sunlight in. The whole living room became bright, and he opened the balcony window. Although the summer wind was a little warm, it also blew away the unpleasant smell in the room. After preparing the milk powder, Yang Ming dripped 2 drops of poplar fruit on his right hand to test the temperature before walking into the master bedroom. Poplar Fruit picked up Kiki, who was sleeping soundly, and touched her forehead. He didn't feel any signs of her burning up again. He let out a sigh of relief. Kiki, Kiki. Poplar Fruit gently shook Kiki's little hand, and then whispered in her ear. Kiki's eyelids moved, but she didn't wake up. Poplar Fruit scratched his head, took the milk bottle, and put it under Kiki's nose. He gently shook it, and then whispered, Kiki, wake up and drink milk. Kiki's nose flapped, and she rubbed her face. Perhaps she wanted to rub her eyes with her little hand, but she still didn't wake up. Looks like I have to use my ultimate move, Poplar Fruit thought to himself. He moved his big face closer and kissed Kiki's little face. Kiki's skin was tender now, and the smell of her body was very fresh. Previously, she had applied alcohol in the hospital, and the smell of alcohol had long disappeared. As Poplar Fruit's lips pressed down and lifted, Kiki's eyes finally opened slowly. It seemed that as soon as she opened her eyes, she saw her father's face hanging in front of her. Kiki was very happy. Her beautiful big eyes formed thin crescents, and her little mouth curled up into a bright smile. She raised her little hand, as if she wanted to touch her father. Yangwei used his own big hand to hold it. Her soft and tender little hand was lying in her father's big palm. Yangwei's heart was about to melt when she saw this. He gently squeezed Kiki's little hand, kissed it, and said, Baby, don't scare Daddy like this in the future. You almost scared Daddy to death yesterday. He was used to calling her Kiki, and he hadn't used this name for a long time. Poplar Fruit hadn't shaved for a few days, and yesterday, he had been busy all night. His stubble was as hard as a bush. Kiki's little hand brushed across Poplar Fruit's chin. She was in so much pain that her mouth twitched, and she showed signs of wanting to cry. Poplar Fruit hurriedly put down her hand and hugged her to coax her. When feeding, Kiki's spirit was still a little sluggish, and she became drowsy as she drank. However, perhaps because she was too hungry, she didn't stop drinking milk. Her mouth and throat were moving, and Poplar Fruit, who hadn't eaten anything today, also felt hungry. He couldn't help but burst out with a roar. After feeding Kiki, he carried her back to the crib to continue sleeping. Poplar Fruit observed the environment of the master bedroom. He also pulled up the curtains and opened a window to let the air circulate in the room. This would be more helpful for Kiki's recovery. Too hungry, Poplar Fruit went to the kitchen to cook a pot of noodles. While he was still busy, dong dong, someone knocked on the door. When he opened it, he saw that it was his godmother, Lu Suqin. Godmother, why are you here? Poplar Fruit's face was bitter as he let her in. Why are you here? Why didn't you tell me what happened last night? As soon as Lu Suqin came in, she didn't even change her shoes before getting angry at Poplar Fruit. It must be Song Jiwen, that brat, who leaked the news. Poplar Fruit thought bitterly. Now that he had provoked his godmother, he wouldn't be able to rest in peace. Don't you already know? Poplar Fruit said shamelessly. After changing her shoes, Lu Suqin stood up and sniffed beside Poplar Fruit. She said, Look at you. You reek of alcohol. I know you drank a lot last night. What kind of father are you? Poplar Fruit really didn't remember that the shirt he was wearing was the t-shirt he used to cool down Kiki yesterday. The originally wet clothes were now dried by the wind. His whole body reeked of sweat and alcohol. It seemed that he had to take a shower before going to bed. It was really smelly. Without waiting for Poplar Fruit's explanation, she went straight to the master bedroom to see Kiki. Lu Suqin lifted the mosquito net and touched Kiki's forehead. When she felt that Kiki had returned to normal temperature, her face relaxed. Poplar Fruit ran to the kitchen to turn off the fire, then hurried back to the bedroom to wait on her. Lu Suqin waved her hand and drove Poplar Fruit back to the living room to talk. She sat down on the sofa and motioned for Poplar Fruit to sit next to her. She said unhappily, Were you in a bad mood yesterday because of the woman? Poplar Fruit sat down awkwardly, nodded, and was about to explain. You don't have to explain. Lu Suqin raised her right hand and said, I don't have to ask. I know it's because of your ex-girlfriend, right? Poplar Fruit nodded awkwardly. I've been there before. I've eaten more salt than you've eaten rice. How can I not know what kind of person you are? Lu Suqin said, You're too sentimental and righteous. You can't get away. After breaking up for so long, you still can't let go of her. Why? Poplar Fruit listened quietly. Lu Suqin continued, Look at you. You were so drunk that you almost ruined little Kiki's life. Is she really worth you being so obsessed with? Is there a father like you? A real man has an indomitable spirit. You don't have to worry about not having a wife. You're not bad. Why do you have to have her? Is she that good? If she was that good, she wouldn't have left you at your most difficult time. Yanghua nodded with a wry smile and said, Godmother, don't worry. I've already made up my mind to let it go. I won't make the same mistake again. He felt tired and hungry, and his mind was in a trance. He couldn't wait to fall asleep on the sofa. But Lu Suqin didn't finish. She continued, What did I tell you in May? I told you to listen to my arrangements and go on blind dates. There are so many good girls in the world waiting for you to choose. If you had listened to me and met a few excellent women, you wouldn't be in such a mess now. Mother, I understand what you're saying, Poplar Fruit said with a sad face. You know? What do you know? Lu Suqin came with a lot to say today. She wouldn't stop until she finished. Poplar Fruit could only swallow his bitterness and listen to her lecture. Lu Suqin's education on life, values, and marriage lasted for more than half an hour. Poplar Fruit was in a trance, and his eyes were not focused. Finally, she concluded, So wait until the weekend. You'll listen to my arrangements. I'll introduce a few good friends' daughters to you. Don't worry, I'll personally check. I won't be careless. Poplar Fruit nodded fiercely. He didn't feel that anything was wrong. No matter what she said, Poplar Fruit just agreed. He really didn't have the energy to play Tai Chi with Lu Suqin. He just wanted to have a good sleep. Lu Suqin had long seen that Poplar Fruit was absent-minded, but she had already gotten the result she wanted. So she smiled, stood up and said, Okay, I've said what I needed to say. You take good care of little Kiki. I'll go back and take care of it for you. She went downstairs, took out her phone, and dialed a number. She said proudly, Jinfeng, you've settled Poplar Fruit. I told you that once I do it. Back at the apartment, Poplar Fruit sent Lu Suqin off in a daze. Then he ate the noodles that had been soaked into a paste. Then he took a hot shower and changed into clean clothes. He staggered into the master bedroom, felt for the bed, and fell in. As soon as he touched the pillow, the sound of snoring could be heard. The double fatigue of body and mind made Poplar Fruit fall into a deep sleep. He didn't even have a dream, but his body was still able to continue to operate the internal strength in his body in his sleep. It was like a never-ending stream. Although it was only a trickle, it flowed along the meridians and nourished every withered cell in Poplar Fruit's body. Yesterday, the soles of Poplar Fruit's feet were injured. When he fell, a beer bottle cap fell on the ground and cut a deep wound. It dragged on the ground and left a long bloody mark. But because Kiki's situation was too serious, Song Jiwen forgot about it. Even Poplar Fruit forgot about it. But his body didn't forget. At that time, the muscles on the soles of his feet contracted automatically. The bleeding stopped quickly, but the wound was still there. But when Poplar Fruit came back, a thin layer of film had formed on the surface. So when Poplar Fruit wiped off the blood mark when he was mopping the floor, he didn't care about it. He thought that the injury wasn't too deep. Now that Poplar Fruit was asleep, the internal strength automatically operated. Traces of qi seeped out of his meridians and gathered at the soles of his feet. Under the film, it nourished the injured cells and stimulated the production of new cells. This kind of repair couldn't be seen by the eyes. But after an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, the film peeled off like a butterfly cocoon, revealing new skin. Besides being slightly red, it was no different from normal skin. There were no signs of injury at all. Poplar Fruit didn't know that his internal strength was so heaven-defying, but this time he didn't think too much. He was now a qualified father. How could such a small change attract his attention? Chapter 52. Night fell, and the lanterns were lit. Pushing the baby stroller, Yang Guo was taking Chi-Chi for a stroll in the lush little garden of the neighborhood. Between the flower beds and trees, there were several street lamps of different shapes faintly discernible. Walking among them, the cicadas chirped and the insects sang. It was very pleasant. At this time, Poplar Fruit heard someone call him from behind. Xiao Yang. He turned around and saw Uncle Jean, who played basketball with him last time. He was wearing a white sleeveless sweatshirt, beach shorts, and flip-flops as he walked over. When he got closer, Poplar Fruit saw that his head was full of sweat. Poplar Fruit smiled and asked, Uncle Jean, what were you doing just now? Why are you sweating so much? What am I doing? Uncle Jean took out a handkerchief from his trouser pocket and wiped his sweat. He said, It's too hot. I'm sweating just for a walk. Uncle Jean was not only burly, but he also had a typical beer belly. His sweatshirt, which was already big, was stretched by him. With such a fat body, it would be strange if he didn't sweat when he walked. Poplar Fruit thought it was interesting, but he didn't expose him. Isn't there a lyrics like this? Life is already so difficult. Some things should not be exposed. The two walked along the path and talked as they walked. Slowly, they talked about basketball. Xiao Yang, why haven't I seen you play basketball recently? Uncle Jean asked as he shook the hem of his sweatshirt. I have no choice, Poplar Fruit said with a smile. I have a daughter to take care of. If I go play basketball, no one will take care of her. Although there were many sports venues in Jinli District, Poplar Fruit didn't use them often. First, Song Jiwen was usually busy, so it was boring for him to play alone. Second, Poplar Fruit couldn't leave Kiki aside and run to the court alone. So, he would only occasionally push the baby stroller and take Kiki to the gym to exercise muscles, hit a dozen sandbags, or play with the barbell. Poplar Fruit could only play basketball with Song Jiwen on the weekends when Kitten came to help watch Kiki. Can't you just let the woman take care of the child? Uncle Jean said doubtfully. Is your wife that busy? Poplar Fruit shook his head and said, No, Kiki's mother left when she gave birth to her. So now, she and I depend on each other. This was the first time Uncle Jean learned about this situation. Although the two of them had a brief chat when they were playing basketball last time, they didn't talk about this. He was very shocked and said with some embarrassment, I'm sorry, I touched on your sore spot. Yang Guo waved his hand and said, It's fine. It's over. We're doing well now. The child is so young. Are you taking care of the child at home now? Uncle Jean asked with a frown. What about your job? He was also experienced and knew how hard it was to take care of a child who was less than a year old. Poplar Fruit said with a smile, No problem. I'm a freelancer now. I can do some work at home. Uncle Jean nodded as if he understood. He didn't ask because it involved Poplar Fruit's privacy. How could he, who had been in the unit for so many years, not understand? Since they were talking about basketball, and both of them were basketball enthusiasts, they continued to talk about it. Although Poplar Fruit hadn't paid attention to the NBA for a while because of Kiki, he still knew a lot about the famous stars in each team. The two of them chatted very happily. As they chatted, Uncle Jean sighed and said, No team in the NBA wants Ejilian. Yao Ming has retired. We really don't have anyone in the NBA. Wait, Poplar Fruit frowned and asked, Yao Ming retired? When did that happen? Ejilian had only entered the NBA in recent years, but he wasn't good enough. No one was optimistic about him. Poplar Fruit didn't care about whether he could play in the NBA or not. However, Yao Ming was different. Yao Ming could be said to be the flag of China on the basketball court. It wasn't just because of his strength. He had worked hard for so many years in the NBA and led the national team to countless honors in the international arena. He had become the spiritual sustenance and pride of the Chinese people. He also became the representative of the Chinese people in front of the world after Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan. Yao Ming was once again lost for the season because of an ankle injury at the end of last year. It affected the hearts of hundreds of millions of Chinese people. After Poplar Fruit heard the news, he silently prayed for him. He hoped that Yao Ming could recover soon, put on the red uniform again, and lead the Rockets to the championship. However, he hadn't paid attention to the news for more than a month. How could Yao Ming retire? Yao Ming was still playing solo at the age of 31. He had just passed his prime. As long as he recovered from his foot injury, he could still continue to play. Poplar Fruit only felt as if he had lost something in his heart. His belief in basketball seemed to be about to collapse. Uncle Gene said in surprise, "You didn't know?" Yao Ming held a press conference 2 days ago to officially announce his retirement. Why did he retire just like that? Poplar Fruit found it hard to accept and muttered. Uncle Gene lowered his head and picked up a big leaf that fell from a tree. He fanned himself with it in his hand and said, "What else can he do if he doesn't retire?" Yao Ming's foot injury isn't something that happened in a day or two. He has been injured continuously for the past 2 years. His foot can no longer support his huge body. He's now 31 or 32 years old. If he continues to play, he'll only get worse day by day. It's better for him to retire. I think his choice is very wise. Uncle Gene was right. Poplar Fruit could still understand that logic, but he still found it hard to accept. After all, Yao Ming was the person who opened the door to the basketball temple for him. If he left, would there still be basketball in China? Would there still be a place for China in the world of basketball? Without Yao Ming, the NBA will only be able to watch a group of foreign Musclemen jump around in the future. Poplar Fruit shook his head and chuckled. Uncle Gene was also full of worry. He nodded and said, "There aren't many young players in China who can play well. I guess they can't even reach the threshold of the NBA. China is really at a point where there's a shortage of young players. Whether it's football or basketball, the level of domestic youth training is really bad." The two of them chatted, from Yao Ming's retirement to China's system. Uncle Gene angrily scolded the Chinese Basketball Association, saying that their various systems were unreasonable. Poplar Fruit felt deeply. He went along and talked about Cuba. Unlike the university leagues abroad, the domestic university leagues were simply small-scale. Many of the outstanding talents in it were buried by the short-sighted Chinese Basketball Association. The more the two of them talked, the more energetic they became. They had a common enemy and regretted not having met earlier. Walking out of the small garden, Uncle Gene warmly invited Poplar Fruit to visit his house. It was difficult to refuse such kindness, so Poplar Fruit gladly accepted. Uncle Jin's house was in the second phase of the community. It was more than 200 square meters, with 4 rooms and 2 living rooms. It was much more spacious than the one Poplar Fruit rented. When he entered, the sight that greeted him was full of splendor. Poplar Fruit could not help but exclaim in his heart, "This is what it means to be rich." Such a big house in such a location in Yangcheng would cost at least 4 million. Uncle Jin's family of 3. His daughter was already 14 years old and would be in her second year of junior high school this year. After the summer break, she would play crazily every day. Recently, Uncle Gene had locked her up at home with a dark face to do her summer homework. When Poplar Fruit arrived, she was forced to come out and greet him by Mrs. Gene. Then, she pouted and went into the room. Mrs. Gene was a gentle and virtuous woman, but her figure was a little petite. When she stood next to Uncle Gene, it was like a real-life version of Beauty and the Beast. After Yanghua came in, sister-in-law Jean enthusiastically ran back and forth. She made tea, and then went to prepare a plate of fruit platter. She simply couldn't stop. Mrs. Jean was very interested in Kiki. She pulled the baby's stroller and played with her on the sofa. Only when she talked about her would she raise her head and say a few words softly. After chatting for a while, Poplar Fruit found out that Uncle Jin's real name was Su Kai-jin. He was from the same family as Poplar Fruit's mother. He was now a divisional leader in the provincial education department. After being shocked, Poplar Fruit felt that you really couldn't judge a book by its cover. Uncle Gene should be around 40 years old, but he was already in a high position. However, Uncle Gene was a good person. He did not speak in a bureaucratic tone and was like an ordinary person. He chatted happily with Poplar Fruit and scolded him without any scruples. Although the difference in age and status between the two of them was huge, they had similar temperaments. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they were friends despite their age difference. Mrs. Jean said that she was running a small business. Poplar Fruit felt that Mrs. Jean was definitely being modest. Opening a cafe in the heart of the new city's central business district, how could such a profitable business be considered small? What shocked Poplar Fruit even more was that although Mrs. Jean spoke softly and did things like a housewife, she was actually a doctorate in economics from Higashiyama University. This completely subverted Poplar Fruit's understanding. At this time, Poplar Fruit felt that he was insignificant. Although he also graduated from Higashiyama University, could earn a lot of money, and could speak 3 foreign languages, when he compared himself to Mrs. Jean, he realized that he was a frog in a well. What was there to be proud of with a mere bachelor's degree? Uncle Jean did not look down on him. After listening to Poplar Fruit's experience because of Mrs. Jin's question, he was full of praise for Poplar Fruit's loyalty. Mrs. Jin's eyes were red, and a few drops of tears flowed down. Uncle Jean turned the fan to the highest setting. His big palm patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder and said, "Xiao Yang, don't belittle yourself. I have seen a lot of young people in the education department. Among them, there are a lot of excellent young people, but there are not many who can do as well as you. For a person, the most important thing is not how much money he can make, but whether he knows how to be a good person. Without good character, even if he makes a lot of money, he will be frustrated." Mrs. Jean also smiled and said, "Yes, Xiao Yang, you are still young. You still have a lot of time to do what you want to do. Your ability is not bad. I believe your future achievements will not be worse than Mrs. Jin's." "What do you mean by not worse than you?" Uncle Jean put his arm around Poplar Fruit's shoulder and smiled. "I am very optimistic about my little brother. In time, he will do very well. Yes, I am not good with words. I will definitely be 1,000 times better than Mrs. Jean in the future." Mrs. Jean covered her mouth and smiled. Infected by their cheerful optimism, Poplar Fruit also smiled brightly. Chapter 53. A peaceful and repetitive life always passed quickly. Unknowingly, it was already the end of July. Midsummer was at its most ferocious. During the day, even the few clouds in the sky were listless. The scorching summer seemed to pass through almost no obstacles, laughing wildly as it pounced on the earth. The steam rising from the asphalt roads, the cracked earth that had lost its greenery, and the leaves of the trees on the edges were somewhat burnt. People were in a hurry. Umbrellas could not block out the ultraviolet rays, nor could they block out the hot waves. Even at night, when the bright sun turned into a warm sunset, and the last ray of afterglow finally disappeared, people still could not feel the slightest bit of coolness. Even the night wind that blew was heated by the hot ground. Not only that, people who hurried home turned on the air conditioner to drive away the dry heat in the house. However, the heat once again gathered outside, as if the sun was everywhere. No one could escape the fate of being roasted. Speaking of air conditioners, every skyscraper in the city at night was full of energy, waiting for the arrival of a new day to swallow the surging alternating current like a river and spit out the heat from the sun and the human body of the entire building. However, the city was too crowded. It was like a group of people standing together smoking. They could only breathe the smoke in each other's faces, and then all they could breathe was each other's exhaust. The heat accumulated and did not dissipate. This was the unsolvable heat island effect in the city. Song Jiwin was as tired as a dog when he returned home every day. His shirt was soaked in sweat from the inside out, as if he had been scooped out of the water. Even if Poplar Fruit cooked and iced mung bean soup for him, he still could not quell his envy, jealousy, and hatred for Poplar Fruit's leisurely life. Faced with such hot weather, Poplar Fruit naturally would not casually take Kiki out. In recent days, he would only take Kiki out for a walk in the garden-like green area of the community when the air was fresh and the sun was warm in the morning. He would let her see the natural landscape, although it was man-made, which was good for her brain development. Usually, the father and daughter would stay at home. Kiki would either sleep or play with her toys. Poplar Fruit would seize the time when Kiki was sleeping to work hard and study hard. Although it was boring, Poplar Fruit didn't mind. He was an otaku after all. In just 2 months, Poplar Fruit already had 200,000 yuan in his bank account. Adding the money that he had spent in the past 2 months, Poplar Fruit had earned more than 220,000 yuan. This was something that he would never have imagined 2 months ago. Of course, it didn't mean that Young was 2 months of earning 200,000 yuan meant that he could earn 100,000 yuan a month. This was because this 200,000 yuan also included the 100,000 yuan that was once in a blue moon in the first month. But even so, his efficiency in earning money was quite amazing. With such a large sum of money in his bank account, Poplar Fruit wasn't in a hurry to spend it. This was because he already had a small idea on how to spend it. However, he still needed to earn a little more. He would wait for a while. Today, Poplar Fruit didn't sit in front of the computer to work as usual after feeding Kiki. He planned to give himself a holiday today. But even if it was a holiday, Poplar Fruit didn't idle around. He moved the baby rocking chair to the living room and let Kiki lie on it to sleep. He picked up the bed and quilt in the crib and stuffed them into the washing machine. It was another sunny day. Poplar Fruit planned to do a thorough cleaning. Although Poplar Fruit often swept and mopped the floor after moving to Jinli District, he hadn't done a thorough cleaning for a month. This made Poplar Fruit, who was a bit of a clean freak, unable to stand it. The washing machine in the bathroom washed Kiki's little quilt. Poplar Fruit picked up the mop and bent down on the floor. Every corner of the living room, bedroom, and study was cleaned until there wasn't a speck of dust. The floor was also polished until it was shiny. If the landlord saw this, he would probably cry, right? Where else could he find such a good tenant? After washing Kiki's little quilt and bed, Poplar Fruit used a bucket to carry them to the living room's balcony. The sun was shining on the balcony. Even the devil's ivy that came over was a little dispirited. Poplar Fruit wiped the guardrail clean and hung the little quilt and bed on it. With such a scorching sun, it probably wouldn't take long for it to dry. The main reason why he washed Kiki first was so that she could cover herself and sleep early. After washing her, Poplar Fruit pulled his own towel from his big bed and threw it into the washing machine. Because it was too hot, Poplar Fruit removed the mattress some time ago, leaving only a cold mat. Therefore, he didn't have a bed to wash. The washing machine didn't stop, it continued to roar. Youngwood didn't stop either. He fetched a bucket of water from the bathroom and used a rag to wipe every surface in the room. The coffee table, the sofa, the dining table, the mat, the desk, the computer table, etc. He didn't even let go of the space under the mousepad. After wiping it once, he wasn't satisfied and continued to wipe it a second time. If you thought that Poplar Fruit only had this level of cleanliness, you were very wrong. Cleaning meant that almost everything in the house had to be cleaned. Poplar Fruit washed Kiki's toys, utensils, and every corner of the kitchen, including the kitchen hood. He also squatted in the bathroom and scrubbed the toilet hole until it was spotless. After cleaning his own house, Yanghua was still not satisfied. He opened the door of the house and mopped the corridor that the cleaner had already done a good job of cleaning. When he saw a little stain on the wall, he couldn't pretend that he didn't see it. He ran home and took a brush and rag. After fiddling with it for a long time, he was satisfied when he couldn't see any stains on the wall. Although Poplar Fruit's obsession with cleanliness wasn't serious, the intensity and concentration of his cleaning was simply outrageous. Song Jiwen used to laugh at him. He was sick and had to be cured. Poplar Fruit was too lazy to pay attention to him. In fact, it was just a little obsessive-compulsive disorder. Anyway, there was nothing wrong with it. The cleaning lasted until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The whole house looked brand new, and Poplar Fruit was quite satisfied. After the hungry Poplar Fruit finished eating and feeding Kiki milk, the father and daughter began to take an afternoon nap. Because the bed and other things were outside, Poplar Fruit had to lie down on the sofa and sleep. The air conditioner was never turned on at home. The weather was hot, and Poplar Fruit only turned on a fan. He also had to be careful to avoid Kiki. When he woke up, the sun was already setting. Poplar Fruit took back the quilt and put it on again. He didn't dare to let Kiki sleep immediately. After all, the quilt that had just been dried was still wrapped in the heat of the sun. It was better to let it cool down first. After giving his daughter a bath, Poplar Fruit also made himself something to eat. He ate alone and didn't do anything fancy. He cooked a simple plate of stir-fried broccoli with meat slices, and then he could eat his next meal. Sure enough, I can only feel the loneliness of a person when I'm eating. Sitting in front of the computer, Poplar Fruit opened Yin Web, which he hadn't been on for a long time. The red color of the page was still the same. As soon as he opened Poplar Fruit, he saw a big notice on the homepage. Dongshin Publishing and Yin Web are recruiting translators from all over the world for the biography of Steve Jobs. Some of them were pseudonyms. Everyone knew. As a hardcore fan of sect leader Chiao, Poplar Fruit had seen news of sect leader Chiao releasing his official biography before. About 2 years ago, sect leader Chiao invited biographer Isaacson to write his biography. Isaacson was famous in Western society in this field. Benjamin Franklin and Albert Einstein? Einstein wrote his autobiography, and this time, Steve Jobs invited him. How could Poplar Fruit not be looking forward to it? In the early news, it was rumored that sect leader Chiao only provided material and memories. He didn't interfere with the entire autobiography. One had to know that when Sir Chiao was Apple's CEO, he was famous for being a tyrant. The entire company had to operate according to his wishes. Even the iPhone and iOS, which were popular all over the world, were all designed according to his preferences. It wasn't easy for sect leader Chiao, who was used to being high and mighty, to not interfere at all. He didn't change a single word, and let the world judge whether he was good or not. What kind of courage and confidence was this? Probably only a great person like sect leader Chiao could have such a big heart. I suspect that I'm overpraising. This is purely my personal opinion. There was a famous writer in the United States, Mark Twain. He wrote many famous novels, essays, and poems in his life. Among them, the most well-known were his 2 children's literature, Tom Sawyer. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Both books could be said to be his representative works, and the latter had an important position in the history of American literature. Hemingway once said, "The entire modern American literature originates from Mark Twain, and Mark Twain is the source of it." Mark Twain's book, Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry Finn is our best book. After that, no other book can compete with it. Mark Twain's position in the American literary world was very high. His works were full of Western-style humor, and the humor was full of criticism of social reality. His life was also mixed. Early on, Early Twain had a good impression of the slavery system. As his experience deepened, he had a clearer understanding of the evil reality hidden under the prosperous surface of America. His book, Huckleberry Finn, was listed as a banned book by American schools because it used the word black. Even such a literary giant was afraid that his autobiography would cause social controversy. After his death, his will even requested that his 5,000-page autobiography be published 100 years later. Although sect leader Joe was famous all over the world and had various titles, his style of doing things was also criticized by many of his colleagues and subordinates. He also had a history of extramarital affairs that he refused to admit even if he was beaten to death and gave birth to a daughter. However, he had the courage to make such a decision. How could Poplar Fruit not be full of admiration for him? At that time, when the news of Steve Jobs had just come out, he had already made up his mind to buy a copy of the book and read it carefully. He wanted to understand the secrets of the great man's life. Now, it seemed that the opportunity was right in front of him. The publishing house was openly recruiting translators. This kind of thing had never happened before, right? And this time, he was translating sect leader Joe's biography. He had the opportunity to read the original text. Didn't the announcement say so? The finalist would be one of the first 200 people in the world to read the book. Just thinking about it made Poplar Fruit's blood boil. What was he waiting for? There were only 2 days left before the deadline for the application. Poplar Fruit did not hesitate at all. He resolutely clicked on the announcement and filled in his resume. In addition to his resume, Poplar Fruit also filled in a questionnaire. It asked a lot about Apple and some business knowledge. As Poplar Fruit was related to Apple, it was not very difficult for him to fill in the questionnaire. There should be a few rounds of the selection process, but Poplar Fruit was already eager to try. It was good that it was difficult and challenging. Next, let me welcome this big battle. Poplar Fruit confidently clenched his fist. Chapter 54. The next afternoon, when Poplar Fruit came back from outside and turned on his computer, he found that they had approved his application. Along with the approved text message was the English manuscript for the first round of trial translation. The translation had to be provided within the specified time. The selection process may be a little different from reality. Yang Guo read it carefully and found that it was a person report from the United States in the 1980s. It was about the struggle of an American novelist at that time. This novelist was not famous in China, but at that time, he had a few best-selling books. Yang Guo had learned about him from a profile of another author. After memorizing the article, Poplar Fruit was not in a hurry to translate it. He made lunch while multitasking to see if there were any unfamiliar allusions in the manuscript. This was Poplar Fruit's habit of translating literature. Until the end of the meal, Poplar Fruit did not find anything that did not make sense from the more than 2,000 words. It seems that this round is mainly about the translator's literary talent, Poplar Fruit thought to himself. Is it really that simple? Of course not. Poplar Fruit did not see any traps in it because his standard was much higher than most translators. After all, he did not memorize the dictionary and many Western classics for nothing. There were still some mysteries hidden in the manuscript that were enough to make others scratch their heads. The first challenge in this round was to be able to accurately identify the traps. This challenge alone could eliminate 30% of the participants. These were all incompetent translators who came to watch. The second challenge was to figure out how to crack these traps and translate the appropriate translation. This challenge was not that simple. Although the corresponding explanation could be found through Google, in English of course, it was very difficult to understand and fully understand it in a short time. Therefore, this round could eliminate a lot of people. However, Yangwa didn't realize that his strength was already far ahead of others, so much so that he could completely ignore this little bit of challenge. Although he had some complaints about the editors on the translation network, Poplar Fruit still typed out the translation that he had already prepared and sent it back. Of course, because he was busy with lunch, the completion time was reasonable and did not attract too much attention from the editors. Before taking a nap, Poplar Fruit received a call from Duan Shueching, which surprised him a little. Since Duan Shueching graduated, she quickly went to the unit to participate in the induction training. She was so busy that she did not have time to call Poplar Fruit, let alone visit Poplar Fruit's house. Today was the last weekend of the month. Duan Shueching finally got rid of the state of disappearing from the world. She called Poplar Fruit and said that she wanted to come over to see Kiki. Poplar Fruit agreed immediately, but he stopped Duan Shueching, who wanted to come over immediately. The afternoon sun was too hot. Poplar Fruit did not want to come out at this time. Therefore, Poplar Fruit asked Duan Shueching to come closer in the evening. In the evening, naturally, he wanted her to stay for dinner. Song Jiwen went home today, but Poplar Fruit did not feel that there was anything wrong with a man and a woman being alone in the house. Perhaps his thoughts were now on Kiki, and he had not thought about love for a long time. After waking up in the afternoon, Poplar Fruit did his translation work in front of the computer until Kiki woke up. After picking up Kiki, wiping her face and changing her diaper, Poplar Fruit put her on the rocking chair that was temporarily moved to the living room. Poplar Fruit picked up a bag that he brought back this morning from the coffee table. He smiled and looked at Kiki, who did not know what was going on. His eyes moved from her big cute eyes to the top of her head and looked at her smooth little hair. That's right. Poplar Fruit opened the bag. Inside lay a delicate clipper, a fluffy soft brush, and a special towel. Today, he was going to cut Kiki's hair. Before Poplar Fruit could do the next step, his phone rang. Poplar Fruit picked up the phone, and Duan Shueching's soft voice came from the receiver. I'm at the gate of your neighborhood. Poplar Fruit took the phone and looked at the time. It was only 4 o'clock. How anxious was this girl to see Kiki? Poplar Fruit said to the phone, Wait, I'll go down to pick you up. Holding an umbrella, Poplar Fruit carried Kiki down. If it were not for Kiki's delicate body, Poplar Fruit would not hold an umbrella. It was too embarrassing for a man. Before reaching the gate, Poplar Fruit saw Duan Shueqing. Although the sun was behind her, Poplar Fruit felt dazzled at that moment. What kind of beauty was this? The girl who stood gracefully at the door with an umbrella was wearing a long dress with Persian floral patterns. Her chestnut hair was waist-length under the sunlight, but there were 2 strands of bohemian braids near her ears. Such a quiet and elegant girl exuded a wild charm. The classical Chinese and exotic romance collided with each other, creating a dazzling light. Poplar Fruit, who was best at using words, found himself at a loss for words at this moment. How could he describe it? It seemed that in front of her, any gorgeous words would be overshadowed. It was like the pearl of a mermaid in the sea facing the sand of the Gobi Desert. The latter could only look at it and sigh. The girl from hell. Poplar Fruit did not know why, but such an English sentence appeared in his mind. Yes, this girl came from hell. There will be no more supernatural content in this book, so don't guess. Otherwise, it would be impossible for her to be so beautiful, and it would be impossible for her to be so charming. She had an extraordinary and refined temperament that kept people away from her. She also had a charming appearance that made people want to chase after her and embrace her. This made Yanghua very grateful for the generosity of the heavens. If Duan Shueqing was allowed to live in the ancient times where the flames of war were everywhere, wouldn't she be another beauty that brought disaster to the country? Just like Bao Si in the Western Zhou dynasty, how many infatuated kings foolishly went to the fire beacon to make her smile? Sighing in his heart, Poplar Fruit greeted the security guard at the gate and welcomed Duan Shueqing in. The sun is still so hot. Why are you here so early? Poplar Fruit complained. Duan Shueqing said softly, It's okay. It's not very hot. Poplar Fruit supported Kiki's little but with his right hand, making her face Duan Shueqing, and said with a smile, Kiki, Auntie Duan is here to see you. Are you happy? Come, say hello to Auntie Duan. Duan Shueqing's beautiful eyes moved from Poplar Fruit to Kiki's little face. Kiki was also looking at her with her mouth slightly open. She smiled slightly, and her long eyelashes fluttered. Kiki did not seem to be interested. She turned her head and leaned on her father's back. Along the way, Poplar Fruit did most of the talking, and Duan Shueqing briefly followed up. Poplar Fruit knew her personality and did not like to talk much, so he did not find it awkward. When they arrived home, Poplar Fruit took Duan Shueqing to visit every room. Needless to say, it was neatly tidied, and even the top shelf was spotless. The second bedroom was converted into a study, and now there was no bed in it. Other than the side of the floor-to-ceiling glass, the other 3 sides of the room were decorated with 2-meter-tall bookshelves. The bookshelves were not full of books, and 2 sides were empty. One side was stacked with rows of books from the university and the foreign language books that Poplar Fruit had recently bought. Duan Shueqing looked at the rows of French and German self-study books and literary works on the bookshelves. She took out one of them, and it was circled. Almost every page had a few notes. There were also 2 brand-new Spanish grammar books on the desk. They looked like they were bought not long ago. In fact, according to Poplar Fruit's current memory, he did not need to take notes at all. As long as he read a book carefully, it would be permanently stored in his mind. However, his previous habit of reading calligraphy and painting had been retained. Looking at all of this, Duan Shueqing looked back at Poplar Fruit in surprise. Poplar Fruit was a little uncomfortable under her beautiful eyes. He scratched his head and asked, What's wrong? Brother Yang, did you write all of this? Duan Shueqing turned the book in her hand and asked doubtfully. Yes, Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Otherwise? Duan Shueqing covered her mouth and said in shock and admiration, That's amazing. She was also a language learner. Although her second foreign language was Spanish, it did not prevent her from judging that Poplar Fruit had really understood all the books on the bookshelves. In other words, Poplar Fruit now knew French and German in addition to English. She knew that Poplar Fruit did not study well in school. He had long stopped learning his second foreign language. But now, It seemed that it was not the situation she knew. Poplar Fruit was now like a talented man who was deeply hidden in a thick fog. Duan Shueching followed him out of the study. Her eyes lingered on his broad back for a long time. Poplar Fruit was arranging the tools for Kiki's haircut while chatting with Duan Shueching. Shueching, how do you feel about work now? He dipped a cotton ball in alcohol and wiped the small clipper. This small clipper had a ceramic shell and was very smooth to the touch. It was said that the protective properties were good. Poplar Fruit had picked it up from the children's product store in the morning. Duan Shueching sat with her legs crossed, her long hair spilling over the sofa like a waterfall. The cool breeze from the electric fan blew her sweat-drenched hair up like willow catkins flying in the air. She gently moved her right hand and clipped it behind her ear. Then she replied, "It's not bad. I'm gradually getting used to it." "Is the training tiring? You've been so busy recently that you don't even have time to call," Poplar Fruit said without looking up as he touched the tip of the clipper to feel the distance. "At the beginning, I had to memorize a lot of systems, so I didn't have time," Duan Shueching said with her head lowered. "I'm sorry." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Why are you apologizing? If you don't have time, can't you just call when you're free? Just like now, when you're free on the weekend, you can come over and sit here." "That's great." Duan Shueching replied, keeping her words to heart. Poplar Fruit took out a photo-framed box from the room and placed it on the coffee table beside the clipper and other tools. He then asked, "You've just started work. Are you used to the working environment? How are your colleagues?" "Well, the working environment is pretty good. It's much better than I imagined. My colleagues are okay. Our director takes good care of me," Duan Shueching said so much in one breath and felt a little embarrassed, so she lowered her head again. "Is your director male or female?" Poplar Fruit smiled. "Female." Duan Shueching raised her head and looked at Poplar Fruit's face. Then she shyly lowered her head like a turtle. "It's fine if it's a female, haha." Poplar Fruit laughed. Nowadays, salty bosses were often in the news. If a beautiful girl like Duan Shueching met a male boss, she would probably be harassed. Chapter 55. Everything was ready. Poplar Fruit touched all the tools on the table and silently recited the process. He felt that he had everything he needed, so he sat down next to Duan Shueching. Duan Shueching was like a frightened rabbit. She looked up in surprise and shyly looked at Poplar Fruit, but she didn't move away. Poplar Fruit didn't notice Duan Shueching's gaze. He placed a soft towel on his lap, then gently lifted Kiki, who was lying quietly in the rocking chair, and let her lie flat on his lap. Poplar Fruit's right hand gently brushed Kiki's head and touched her smooth and thin hair. Kiki's hair had slowly turned from brown to black. It was very different from the light yellow hair she had when she was just born. Poplar Fruit picked up a small comb and wet it in the basin of warm water on the coffee table. Then he gently combed Kiki's hair a few times to let it get some moisture. Poplar Fruit then picked up the small clipper and gestured on Kiki's head. Of course, the small clipper didn't appear in front of Kiki's eyes. He tried his best not to make Kiki panic. Duan Shueching then understood what Poplar Fruit was going to do. She nervously grabbed her skirt and pursed her lips, not daring to make a sound. Kiki seemed to feel something, and she twisted on her father's leg. Poplar Fruit quickly put down the small clipper and stroked her chest to calm Kiki down. Finally, Kiki calmed down, and Poplar Fruit picked up the small clipper again. This was the first time he shaved Kiki's hair, and it was also Kiki's first haircut. Poplar Fruit felt a little nervous. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. When his hands stopped shaking, Poplar Fruit began the next step. Poplar Fruit's left hand was gently holding Kiki's head. If Kiki suddenly turned her head, he could exert force to control her head and prevent her from getting hurt. Poplar Fruit opened the small clipper with his right hand. After he started it, the clipper almost didn't make any sound. Poplar Fruit nodded with satisfaction. The silent effect was really good. The small clipper had been lubricated, and Poplar Fruit wasn't very worried that it would get stuck. Originally, there was a positioning comb in the package, but Poplar Fruit didn't plan to put it on. The positioning comb looked long and sharp, and Poplar Fruit was worried that it would pierce Kiki's head. Moreover, Poplar Fruit trusted the feeling of his hands more. Then, Poplar Fruit moved the small clipper to a position close to Kiki's head. After estimating the distance, Poplar Fruit began to push from the forehead, along the curve of the head, and stopped near the top of the skull. The small clipper pushed the cut hair onto the towel, and a small tuft of soft hair accumulated. In. Kiki hummed twice and was about to squirm. Poplar Fruit hurriedly held her head and coaxed her a few times to calm her down. Poplar Fruit continued to push the hair on the forehead and temples. He used the same method repeatedly. Then, he gently turned Kiki's body over and pushed the hair at the back of her head to her feet. Fortunately, the hair at the back of her head was thinner. Before Kiki felt any discomfort, Poplar Fruit had already finished pushing. Next was the top of her head. Poplar Fruit had read that the top of a child's head was different from the rest of the hair. It played an important role in protection. Poplar Fruit didn't dare to be careless. When he pushed the clipper, he raised his hand a little higher so that Kiki's top of her head was left with a little more hair. Finally, Poplar Fruit looked at Kiki's head again. The main thing was to trim it so that the hair looked smoother and there wouldn't be any gaps. Poplar Fruit put down the small clipper, picked up the soft brush, and gently swept the broken hair on Kiki's head onto the towel. Then, he picked up a small towel and wiped Kiki's forehead and temples. After cleaning up, Poplar Fruit put his palm under Kiki's armpit and lifted her up. She looked so beautiful from left to right. Poplar Fruit smiled with satisfaction. Duan Shueching, who didn't dare to breathe loudly at the side, finally relaxed. Poplar Fruit turned his head and asked her, "Shueching, come and see how my skills are." Duan Shueching nodded fiercely and said, "You cut it very well. Brother Young, you're really amazing." Her eyes were about to pop out little stars. Poplar Fruit smiled proudly. He handed Kiki to Duan Shueching's arms and asked her to help take a look. He wanted to clean up the mess. Poplar Fruit picked out the longer and better-looking hair from the towel. Then, he carefully put it into the small photo frame-like box and closed the glass lid. This was Kiki's baby hair souvenir album. After gently shaking the hair on the towel into the trash can, he rolled the towel into a ball and put it in the basin. Poplar Fruit raised his head and looked at Duan Shueching. Duan Shueching was really stiff now. She didn't know what to do with Kiki. She didn't have much experience in holding a child. Now that Kiki was lying on her lap, her two hands were stupidly supporting Kiki's shoulders. She felt very uncomfortable. Poplar Fruit found it funny. He quickly went over and took Kiki. Then, he let her lie in the rocking chair first and didn't bother Duan Shueching. Duan Shueching breathed a sigh of relief. She glanced awkwardly at Poplar Fruit and felt a little regretful. Poplar Fruit didn't spend too much time cleaning the small clippers, small combs, and other tools. Then, he put Kiki's baby hair souvenir album on the cabinet in the bedroom. After that, Poplar Fruit didn't have time to take care of Duan Shueching. He turned on the computer so that Duan Shueching wouldn't be bored out of her mind. Then, he went to bathe and feed Kiki. Although Poplar Fruit was really thoughtful, Duan Shueching sat alone in front of the computer. Listening to Kiki's giggles and Poplar Fruit's pretentious laughter and scolding, she felt a little out of place. She was like a snow lotus planted in the mortal world. No matter how beautiful she was, it was difficult for her to truly fit in. Duan Shueching didn't know why, but when she thought that she couldn't fit in with the happy atmosphere of Poplar Fruit's family, her heart felt very uncomfortable. She felt that her mind was in a mess. The mouse wheel was unconsciously scrolling. She didn't pay attention to the content of the webpage at all. It seemed that this was the first time in Duan Shueching's life that her heart was in such a mess. She didn't know what to do and sat in front of the computer in a daze. Then, Poplar Fruit poked his head in from the door and asked with a smile, "What are you looking at?" Duan Shueching came back to her senses. She pretended to fix the hair on her forehead and said hurriedly, "No, nothing." "Haha, it's okay. You continue playing. I'll take Kiki to change." Kiki, who was tightly wrapped in the quilt, also poked her head out to look around like her father. However, her intonated laughter gave her away. Poplar Fruit stroked Kiki's hair, which was still a little wet, and carried her back. After changing clothes and feeding her, Poplar Fruit carried Kiki to the rocking chair, then moved the chair to the dining room. He called Duan Shueching over and said to her, "I'm going to cook. Help me take care of Kiki." Poplar Fruit also considered that Duan Shueching didn't know how to carry a child, so he simply let Kiki lie in the rocking chair. This way, Duan Shueching could rock the chair, and Kiki liked it. Okay, Duan Shueching nodded seriously. After watching Poplar Fruit put on an apron and walk into the kitchen, Duan Shueching half squatted on the ground, reached out her white jade finger, and hooked it on Kiki's little face. Kiki didn't ignore Duan Shueching like before. After all, they had met a few times and spent some time together. She smiled, raised her little hand, and brushed it across Duan Shueching's fingertips. Duan Shueching felt as if an electric current flowed from her fingertips to her heart, and the confusion from before disappeared without a trace. At this moment, Duan Shueching's beautiful face, which was used to being cold, suddenly bloomed with a beautiful smile. If Poplar Fruit saw this, he would definitely sigh in his heart and say, "A smile that can overturn a country, is that all there is to it?" Unfortunately, Poplar Fruit didn't have such a blessing. When he finished washing the rice and put it into the pot to cook, Duan Shueching had already restrained the smile on her face. Only her cheeks were still slightly red, but under the dim lighting in the room, Poplar Fruit couldn't see it. "Shueching, don't squat." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Pull up a stool and sit. You don't need me to teach you, right?" Okay. Duan Shueching moved a stool from the dining table over. She reached behind her back and gently lifted her long hair that reached below her waist. Then she sat on it, crossed her legs, leaned over, and slowly rocked the rocking chair with one hand, while playing a game with Kiki with the other. Kiki squinted her eyes in enjoyment and called out intermittently. Seeing that they were getting along so well, Poplar Fruit happily returned to the kitchen to continue cooking. The ingredients were bought during the day, but Poplar Fruit didn't take out fish or meat from the fridge. Duan Shueching only ate bland food, so everything was simple. Stir-fried lettuce that only had green onions to enhance the flavor, golden and dazzling beef with egg, tender and white mushroom, stir-fried tofu with minced meat, and winter melon and pork rib soup that was stewed until the melon and meat were all bland. After some hesitation, Poplar Fruit finally made himself a plate of beef with oyster sauce. He was a carnivore, and if he only relied on the few strips of beef with egg without any oil, he definitely wouldn't be able to eat. Poplar Fruit walked out of the kitchen with the last of the winter melon and pork rib soup and said to Duan Shueching with a smile, "Let's eat." He was busy in the kitchen for nearly an hour. Kiki was playing in the rocking chair and almost fell asleep. Poplar Fruit picked up the sleepy Kiki and let her go back to the room to sleep. When he came out, Duan Shueching stood by the dining table and whispered to Poplar Fruit, "Why did you make so many dishes? It's just for the two of us." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "It's okay. If you can't finish it, the rest is mine." Duan Shueching really ate less than half a bowl of rice, and then she ate some more dishes. She only picked up a piece of beef with egg, but she ate a lot of lettuce and mushroom tofu. Finally, she drank 2 bowls of soup. In the end, she frowned and said to Poplar Fruit, "Brother Yang, the dishes you cooked are really good. I feel that I can't help but eat too much. I will become fat." Duan Shueching was still worried and touched her stomach. Poplar Fruit cleaned up the rest of the dishes. After swallowing the rice in his mouth, he smiled and said, "It can't be. I think you won't become fat no matter how much you eat." "I can't. I usually only eat 1 dish." Duan Shueching said. "It's okay." Poplar Fruit shook his head and said, "You have been working so hard recently. You consume a lot of energy. It's okay to eat a little more." And Duan Shueching nodded. After eating, Duan Shueching hesitated and stood up to help clean up the dishes on the table. Poplar Fruit quickly stopped her and said with a smile, "Let me do it. Let me do it. How can I let you do this?" Not to mention Duan Shueching, who didn't do any household chores. Even if it was someone else, Poplar Fruit would be embarrassed to let the guest clean up the dishes. When Duan Shueching left, Poplar Fruit went out of the community to help her stop a taxi. Looking at the taxi leaving a trail of exhaust, Poplar Fruit shook his head and turned to go home. But tonight, he was still alone in the house. In Kiki. Chapter 56. The afterglow of the sunset shone through the glass window and through the long and narrow aisle. With the melodious piano sound, it swayed and exuded a quiet and elegant atmosphere. Poplar Fruit sat by the window, dressed in a suit and leather shoes. There was a rose on the table, and his right index finger tapped on the table from time to time. His thoughts drifted away in the strong coffee aroma that filled the space. Yes, Poplar Fruit was now doing the most ridiculous and vulgar thing in the world. A blind date. Back to the night when he sent Duan Shueching away, Song Jiwen went home for dinner. When he came back, he didn't bring back anything delicious. Instead, he brought back a piece of bad news. He conveyed Lu Suchin's order to Poplar Fruit, saying that she had contacted a girl for him and asked him to meet her tomorrow evening. Poplar Fruit had a headache when he heard this. Lu Suchin didn't contact him last week, and he thought that Lu Suchin had forgotten about it. He didn't expect that in the end, he still couldn't escape this disaster. Yanghua didn't want to give up and called Lu Suchin. She wanted to find an excuse to get out of it. However, Lu Suchin scolded Poplar Fruit over the phone and said, "You stay at home all day. What can happen to you? You still want to lie to me?" Not only that, but the old lady also came over early this morning to supervise in person to prevent Poplar Fruit from lying to his heart and refusing to go in the end. The old lady came with a murderous look, which scared the kitten who had just come out of Song Jiwen's room. However, the old lady didn't care about her son's girlfriend. She knew Song Jiwen's nature. She didn't know when he would dump her. If she made friends with her now, wouldn't it be more awkward in the future? She nodded and greeted them indifferently and ignored them. The suit in Poplar Fruit's wardrobe was the one he wore to work a few months ago. Looking at it now, it didn't fit anymore. The trousers couldn't cover Poplar Fruit's legs at all. Therefore, the old lady hurriedly dragged Poplar Fruit to the shopping mall. Even Song Jiwen and the kitten, who wanted to slack off at home, had to follow along. With a bitter smile on his face, Poplar Fruit helplessly listened to the old lady's instructions and let the shop assistant take his body length, arm length, and hip circumference. During this period of time, Poplar Fruit felt that the increase in his height had slowed down. A few days ago, he secretly measured himself. Now, he was a little over 184 meters tall. He estimated that in the end, another 2 centimeters would be the limit. This was also good. If he continued to grow, wouldn't he be seen as a weirdo walking on the streets? Recently, Poplar Fruit had grown more than 10 centimeters, and almost all of it had grown on his legs. Usually, when he wore shorts at home, he didn't pay attention. This time, when he came to the suit shop, he finally measured it for the shop assistant. His legs were 106 meters long. Heaven-defying. 106 meters long legs. If it was in the north, there might be some people who could reach this standard. But in the south, even in a city as big as Yangcheng, it was still extremely rare. This made the shop assistant very worried. Because Lu Suchin only wanted ready-made clothes and didn't want to order them, it was too late to order them. The shop assistant searched the warehouse for a long time before she found a pair of trousers that fit Poplar Fruit's legs. She smiled and said, "This is the largest size in our shop. If it still doesn't fit, then we'll have to order it." After picking out a fitting shirt, a casual suit jacket, and a belt, Poplar Fruit walked into the changing room to change. As the saying goes, Buddha relies on gold, and people rely on clothes. This sentence was best used on Poplar Fruit. When he walked out of the changing room, the first person he saw was Song Jiwen. His glasses fell to the ground. Then, Xiao Mao was stunned. The shop assistant was stunned. The other customers in the shop were also stunned. Thick eyebrows like swords, black eyes like stars, a tall and slightly hooked nose, and a handsome and angular face. Perhaps because he noticed that people were looking at him, Poplar Fruit's mouth showed a trace of an embarrassed smile. He looked like a shy and charming young man. If you only looked at his face, Poplar Fruit had the potential to be a pretty boy. The most eye-catching thing was his pair of long legs, which looked so slender and powerful against the backdrop of his well-ironed trousers, making the eyes of all the girls present emit little stars. Poplar Fruit practiced boxing every day, so he had maintained a good figure. Although his appearance didn't look thick, there wasn't a trace of fat on his waist and abdomen. The casual suit looked even better at the waist. If he said that he was a model, people would probably believe him. Someone once said, "If you want others to think that you are handsome, a 1.5-meter tall boy needs a face that can turn people upside down, a 1.6-meter tall boy needs a face that is as bright as the stars, a 1.7-meter tall boy needs a face with delicate features, a 1.8-meter tall boy needs a face with regular facial features, and a 1.9-meter tall boy can be shameless." Although this was a big exaggeration, it did indeed illustrate the aesthetic concept of modern people. If one's height reached 1.8-meter tall, the face didn't seem to be that important. Before Poplar Fruit grew taller, his face could be rated 85 points. It wasn't to the extent that he could turn people upside down, but he was still a little handsome. But after growing taller, his appearance also rose. He jumped from the level of a little handsome to the level of an idol. The other female customers in the store were whispering to their companions. Poplar Fruit, who had sharp ears, didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he heard them whispering in surprise. "Is there a big star here today? How come I haven't seen him before? He's too handsome. Yes, yes, look at his long legs. I want to hug them." Her companion looked at Poplar Fruit's legs with a love-struck expression. Poplar Fruit sweated and hurried to Song Ji-win's side. "Damn, Laogua, why didn't I realize before that you have the potential to be a model?" Song Ji-win said in surprise. He walked around Poplar Fruit and patted him. "TSK, TSK, if you stand at the door wearing this, the store's business will definitely explode." The shop assistant also looked at Poplar Fruit with stars in her eyes. Hearing Song Ji-win's words, she nodded subconsciously. Then, she suddenly felt that her actions were inappropriate. She quickly stopped nodding and covered her mouth in embarrassment. Lu Suqin slapped the back of Song Ji-win's head and laughed. "How can you talk like that?" she said to Poplar Fruit with satisfaction. "Look at what you used to wear. A good clothes rack is ruined by you. It's like a pearl covered in dust. I think this set is very good. Look at how spirited it is." Poplar Fruit also liked it very much. After twirling in front of the mirror twice, he went to the fitting room to change and asked the shop assistant to pack it up. When he walked to the cashier, Poplar Fruit realized that the old lady had already paid the bill when he went back to the fitting room. Looking back, Poplar Fruit wanted to give the money back to the old lady, but Lu Suqin refused. Poplar Fruit could only accept the suit that cost more than 3,000 yuan helplessly. Sitting in the cafe, Poplar Fruit's fingers gently tapped on the table. Only then did he realize that the old lady was indeed astute. She gave him such expensive clothes to make him feel guilty and not dare to half-heartedly deal with this blind date. Poplar Fruit shook his head with a bitter smile and looked out the window. Kiki had been coaxed to sleep, and now the old lady was taking care of her. The two of them were sitting in Song Ji-win's car, and he didn't know where they were going. In any case, they had agreed to wait outside, but now the car was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, a shadow flashed above his left eye. When Poplar Fruit turned around, a white-collared lady was sitting in the booth opposite him. There was a women's wear magazine on the table. The white-collared lady looked pretty. She was wearing a black suit, a white embroidered blouse, and a short ponytail. She looked clean and neat, a typical white-bone spirit from a foreign company. Lu Yunran used to go to work like this, so Poplar Fruit was naturally familiar with her. "You are Mr. Poplar Fruit, right?" the white-collared lady asked naturally. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Yes. You are Miss Qin Xiuxia." Hearing Poplar Fruit say her name, the white-collared lady frowned and said, "You should call me by my English name, Kathy. That's what my colleagues and friends call me." Poplar Fruit shrugged his shoulders and said indifferently, "Okay." He stretched out his hand to call the waiter and turned to Qin Xiuxia and asked, "Kathy, what do you want?" Qin Xiuxia flipped through the menu and said, "Spaghetti bolognese and a fresh fruit salad. If you want a drink, a cup of cappuccino. It must be hot." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "I want a sirloin steak. I heard from my friend that your steak is very delicious. Kathy, do you want one?" Qin Xiuxia shook her head. "Then I'll have one. If you want coffee, white mocha. I like it sweeter. Do you have any recommended dishes here?" Poplar Fruit asked the waiter and finally ordered a tiramisu cake. Then he closed the menu and let the waiter take it away. "Mr. Yang graduated from Higashiyama University?" Qin Xiuxia broke the silence and asked. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "That's right. By the way, Kathy, you don't have to call me Mr. Yang. Just call me by my name. Just call me Poplar Fruit." When Qin Xiuxia was ordering just now, she had a good impression of Poplar Fruit. Moreover, Poplar Fruit's image also gave him a lot of points. She nodded and asked, "Poplar Fruit, why didn't you choose to go abroad to further your studies after graduation? I heard that you also graduated with an English major." "Why?" "There's no reason. Firstly, I'm not interested in studying abroad. Secondly, I don't want to add more burden to my family," Poplar Fruit said. After listening to Poplar Fruit's answer, Qin Xiuxia nodded thoughtfully. She said regretfully, "What a pity. If you came back from studying abroad, the chances of getting an offer from a big company would be much higher. Of course, I'm not talking about salary. Just like my current company, PNC, the future development will be much better. This is unimaginable in a small company." Poplar Fruit smiled and didn't refute her. However, he began to feel that Qin Xiuxia was worshipping foreign things. Every 3 sentences, an English word would pop out. "Kathy, you came back from studying abroad? Which university did you go to?" Poplar Fruit asked. When she talked about her own glorious past, Qin Xiuxia's eyebrows danced as she spoke. After listening to her, Poplar Fruit knew that the woman in front of him who praised studying abroad was only in a third-rate university in the United States of America. It wasn't even ranked in the top 500 in the world. How did Poplar Fruit know? Because he once checked the ranking of Higashiyama University and looked at the list of the top 500 universities in the world. In his photographic memory, there was absolutely no such university that Qin Xiuxia mentioned. Although the name of the university that Qin Xiuxia mentioned sounded very impressive, Poplar Fruit was still certain that this university was not as good as Higashiyama University that he graduated from. Poplar Fruit didn't expose her, nor did he laugh at her. After all, she also spent a few years on the other side of the ocean to get a master's degree. It was considered a gold-plated degree. It was much more noble than his own degree. Chapter 57. When it came to her experience studying abroad, Qin Xiuxia was like a chatterbox. Under the guidance of Poplar Fruit, who used to be a foreign trade elite, she became happier and happier as she spoke. She almost revealed all of her details. Speaking of which, Qin Xiuxia did have the right to be proud. She was an overseas returnee, had a master's degree, and had a good appearance. Her job was also the kind that Poplar Fruit used to look up to: high monthly salary, high benefits, more than 15 months of salary a year, work location in the CBD center, and a comfortable high-end work environment. With her qualifications, she could indeed look down on most of the graduates in China. However, Qin Xiuxia's words expressed contempt for her domestic education and small company work made Poplar Fruit feel a little uncomfortable, probably because she drank too much foreign ink. There were always some people in China who came back from studying abroad and boasted that they were superior. They thought that everything was good abroad and nothing in China was pleasing to their eyes. It was as if they had been brainwashed by pyramid schemes. They thought that the outside world was beautiful, free, and vast, and that there were restrictions everywhere in China and the system was rotten. But was that really the case? In fact, there was a dark side under any system. Some people only saw good things abroad and ignored the bad side. However, when they looked at China, it was the opposite. and all the good things were ignored. Poplar fruit was not superstitious about how good China was, but he also did not think that it was heaven abroad. Every year, so many people came back from studying abroad. Could it be that they did not know what was good and did not want to stay abroad? Wasn't it because they stayed abroad for too long and felt uncomfortable everywhere, and it was easy to encounter racial discrimination? In the end, they found that home was still the warmest. Therefore, although Poplar Fruit was too lazy to refute or correct these people's wrong views, he always felt unhappy when he heard such words. How could a person forget their ancestors? While the waiter was serving the dishes, Poplar Fruit interrupted Qin Xiuxia's leisurely talk and said with a smile, "Kathy, try the cooking of this cafe." He also kindly pushed the tiramisu cake in front of Qin Xiuxia. Qin Xiuxia's eating posture was very polite. She used the fork and spoon very pleasing to the eye when eating noodles. On the other hand, Poplar Fruit's knife and fork were somewhat clumsy when dealing with the steak in front of him. It wasn't that he hadn't eaten Western food before, but he only had a few experiences of eating with a knife and fork. In order to prevent the knife and fork from making a sharp sound on the white porcelain plate, Poplar Fruit struggled to cut the steak into pieces. The afterglow of the setting sun had already dissipated. The dim yellow lights of the coffee shop, coupled with the faint sound of the violin, made the atmosphere even more romantic and warm. However, Poplar Fruit was not in the mood to savor it. He was now blushing as he hurriedly finished the ugly steak in front of him. At this time, Qin Xiuxia was quite tactful. She didn't say anything about Poplar Fruit's actions. She picked up the cappuccino and took a sip. Then she picked up the tablecloth and wiped the corner of her mouth. She looked at Poplar Fruit and asked, "Poplar Fruit, what do you do now?" "Right now," Poplar Fruit thought and said, "I'm self-employed." Self-employed? Qin Xiuxia had gone on many blind dates, but this was the first time she met someone who said that he was self-employed. After all, it was possible to say that you were self-employed without a job. She asked in confusion, "Then do you want to open a company?" "Open a company? I don't have that plan right now." Poplar Fruit shook his head and said. Qin Xiuxia frowned and asked, "Then do you stay at home all day?" Looking at Poplar Fruit nodding, she asked again, "If you stay at home all day, how do you ensure your income? Do you need your parents to support you? You are the most useless group of people in this society." At this time, she realized that her tone was a little harsh. She was afraid that Poplar Fruit would be angry, so she quickly said, "Sorry, I don't mean that. No, no." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "I can understand what you mean, but you might have misunderstood. When I said self-employed, it doesn't mean that I don't have a job at all. I am a translator, so I can work at home. I don't need to go to work." Translator? Oh. Qin Xiuxia nodded thoughtfully and said, "I understand." She hesitated and said, "I also have a few friends. They are also in Poplar Fruit's line of work, but their salary is really not high, and this line of work is very tiring." "Haha, it's just a hobby." Poplar Fruit laughed and said. Qin Xiuxia was now paying attention to Poplar Fruit's feelings, but Poplar Fruit still had some complaints in his heart. If they really calculated, it was really hard to tell whose income was higher and who was lower. After all, Poplar Fruit's monthly income was now at the level of 50,000 to 100,000. Speaking of tiring and hard work, Poplar Fruit wanted to laugh even more. What kind of work was harder than working in a foreign company, referring to the same salary? Foreign companies had to work more than 10 hours a day, and sometimes they had to work overtime on weekends. Poplar Fruit only translated for 5 to 6 hours a day, and the rest of the time was under his control. If there was anything, he could give himself a break at any time. When it came to tiring and hard work, there was really no comparison between the two. Poplar Fruit found that as they talked about money again. This was one of the reasons why Poplar Fruit didn't like to go on blind dates. He remembered seeing a joke before about a man and a woman going on a blind date. The woman asked, "Do you have a house with 3 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, and 2 bathrooms? Do you have a car?" The man replied, "No." The woman's face changed, and she stood up and pretended to leave. The man said, "I have a villa, Why do I need to live in a small suite? I usually drive a sports car. Do I have to change to a car? The woman's butt landed again, and she smiled sweetly. The man continued, when I started my business, I mortgaged my villa and car, and now I don't have any cash. The woman was furious, stood up and said, I have something to do. I'll leave first. The man said, but fortunately, I got a venture capital investment from America, and the company went public. The woman turned and sat down, smiled, and the blind date continued. The man said, but recently, the IT market is not doing well, and the stock price has fallen below the issue price, and it's going to be closed soon. The woman stood up and said, I really have something to do. I want to leave. The man quickly said, fortunately, my company was bought by Weibo, and I have a few $100 million in cash, and now I can make a comeback. The woman smiled charmingly, turned and sat down again and said, You're so bad, always teasing me. At this time, 2 doctors in white coats ran in, grabbed the man and scolded, You ran out of the hospital again. Go back and take your medicine. This joke wasn't too funny, but it also reflected the essence of blind dates between men and women in modern society. In the end, it was all about income, whether they had a house or a car. Sometimes, the parents would even bring the blind date along, and when they met, they would ask questions like how much their monthly salary was. Poplar Fruit was very disgusted with this kind of blind date. Would there still be feelings for a marriage that was obtained in this way? Was love not important when money was the way? The reason why Poplar Fruit could talk to Qin Xiuxia for so long, besides Lu Suqin, was also because Qin Xiuxia did not do it so openly like the woman in the story. But in the end, it was impossible to be free from vulgarity, and in the end, they still had to talk about the key issue of money. Lu Suqin had told Poplar Fruit not to tell anyone that she had a child out of wedlock, and that he should say more good things on the first blind date. When the time was right, he could slowly talk about it. But Poplar Fruit really had no interest in Qin Xiuxia now. Although he had always been in agreement with her, Poplar Fruit's ideology was completely different from hers. Up until now, Qin Xiuxia had been trying to correct Poplar Fruit's wrong values and career outlook. How could he be willing to continue? Qin Xiuxia was actually a good person, and she was not a snobbish woman. When she talked about the salary, at most, she hoped that her future partner could be as responsible as she was. However, she should be looking for a partner in her own circle. She should find a man who was like-minded and could talk to her. In this case, Poplar Fruit felt that there was no need to waste everyone's time. He smiled and said to Qin Xiuxia, Kathy, I have something that I don't know if you know about. Qin Xiuxia put down the cup and asked curiously, What is it? Although I haven't been married, I already have a daughter. She's not even 1 year old yet, and I'm raising her. When he said this, Poplar Fruit saw a look of surprise and disbelief in Qin Xiuxia's eyes. Qin Xiuxia, who had always been talkative, didn't know what to say now. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, I said this mainly because I don't want to hide it from you. You see, we've talked for so long today, and it's time to let you know about such a big thing. If it's not suitable, we don't need to continue wasting time in the future, right? And if you can't accept it, I can understand. This is human nature. Poplar Fruit saw that Qin Xiuxia was in a dilemma and simply gave her a way out. At this time, Qin Xiuxia also showed the ability and straightforwardness of a female elite working in a foreign company. She packed her bag, stood up, and reached out to Poplar Fruit. She said, I admire and appreciate your honesty, but this is a big matter of marriage. I really can't. Please understand. Poplar Fruit quickly stood up. He was at least 2 heads taller than Qin Xiuxia. Poplar Fruit leaned over to shake hands with Qin Xiuxia and said with a smile, It's okay. I can understand. So that's it for today? Qin Xiuxia walked out of the booth and said, Today, it's on my treat. I know it's not easy for a man to raise a child. Poplar Fruit had just sat down, but he quickly stood up and said, No. Okay, you don't have to fight for it. Qin Xiuxia now fully showed the temperament of a strong woman. Before Poplar Fruit finished speaking, she pushed Poplar Fruit back to his seat, waved her hand heroically, and said, Goodbye. We'll meet again in the future. She went to the front desk to pay the bill without any explanation, and only left Poplar Fruit with her back. Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He stood up again, shook his head, and shouted gloomily in his heart, "What's not easy? It's easy for me. I'm really rich." Poplar Fruit felt that his self-esteem was a little bit damaged after being sympathized with by a woman and let her pay for the blind date. So be it. The first blind date of his life could be considered to have ended in a dramatic way. Poplar Fruit's right hand hooked the coat on his shoulder, and his left hand in his pocket, slowly walked out of the coffee shop. It was late at night, and the streets were brightly lit. People came and went on the sidewalk. It was so noisy. How could it be more comfortable than home? Poplar Fruit took out his mobile phone and called Song Ji-win. Although the car hadn't arrived yet, Poplar Fruit was ready to receive the old lady's reprimand. Chapter 58. Here comes the food. Poplar Fruit walked out of the kitchen with a smile. He was holding Kiki's milk bottle in his hand. He shook the milk inside and walked over to Kiki as if he was showing off. Kiki was half lying in the rocking chair. She kicked her legs and looked at Poplar Fruit. She put the finger of her right hand into her mouth and moved her lips up and down. It was unknown whether she was biting or sucking. "Aya, Kiki, why are you eating your little hand again?" Poplar Fruit frowned and squatted beside the rocking chair with a puzzled expression. Kiki looked at her father's enlarged face and felt very happy. She raised her left arm and waved it in the air. She almost touched Poplar Fruit's face, as if she wanted her father to taste it too. Poplar Fruit chuckled and reached out to pull Kiki's right hand out of her mouth. He stretched his head over and pretended to bite it. He said threateningly, "Ow, ow. If you don't listen to me, Daddy will eat you." Kiki's little hand that was covered in saliva had a milky fragrance, but it was wet. Poplar Fruit picked up the small handkerchief beside the rocking chair and wiped it for her. Kiki didn't understand, but she was amused by Poplar Fruit's actions. She kicked her legs high and touched Poplar Fruit's hair. She even grinned and laughed. Poplar Fruit carried Kiki out of the rocking chair and raised her in front of his face. He touched her forehead with his head and said, "Still naughty. Still naughty." Kiki didn't want to be outdone and fought back. Poplar Fruit played with her for a while. Finally, he kissed her little face and happily took her back into his arms and began to feed her milk. Poplar Fruit looked at Kiki greedily sucking the milk in the bottle and rubbing the pacifier at the front of the bottle. He suddenly understood. It turned out that Kiki liked to eat her own hand so much recently. It wasn't that she really thought that her white and tender hand was delicious, but that she treated her own hand as a pacifier. Poplar Fruit remembered reading a parenting book in the past. It analyzed the reasons why children ate their hands. One of the reasons was that children were attached to the source of milk. They would unconsciously put their little hand in their mouth and suck. This was especially true for artificially fed children. Every time the milk in the bottle was finished, the parents would take the bottle away. That way, they would have fewer chances to suck, and they would gradually turn to suck their own fingers. This situation would continue until the sucking reflex gradually disappeared. Only then would the situation slowly improve. There was another reason why children ate their hands. It was because when a child was about to teeth, the child's gums would feel uncomfortable. She would feel itchy and even painful. Then, she would crazily put her little hand into her mouth to relieve this uncomfortable feeling. No matter what the reason was, Poplar Fruit couldn't let Kiki eat her own fingers every day. Human skin would wrinkle or even break if it was soaked in water for a long time, let alone Kiki's delicate skin. Looking at Kiki, who was still desperately sucking the milk, Poplar Fruit thought to himself, "It's time to buy her a pacifier that she can bite on." At this time, Poplar Fruit's phone rang. However, Poplar Fruit was still feeding Kiki. His hands were not free, so he didn't pick up the phone. The phone rang for a long time before it stopped. Who was it? Poplar Fruit was very puzzled. He would call back later. Poplar Fruit noticed that the corners of Kiki's mouth were glistening. This was definitely not from when she was drinking milk. It should be because she had bitten her finger in her mouth just now, which stimulated her mouth to secrete more saliva. Then, it flowed out. After Kiki finished drinking, Poplar Fruit quickly took a small towel to wipe the saliva from the corner of her mouth. After putting down Kiki in the rocking chair and putting away the milk bottles, Poplar Fruit finally had time to pick up the phone from the coffee table. You can't eat your hand. Poplar Fruit reached out and pulled Kiki's right hand out of her mouth. He said, "Be good. Daddy will buy you a pacifier tonight." He turned his head and pressed the home button on the phone. The screen lit up. It was his mother. Poplar Fruit unlocked the screen and dialed back. "Hello? Mom." "Fruit, why didn't you answer the phone until now?" Su Jinfeng asked anxiously. Hearing Su Jinfeng's tone, Poplar Fruit became nervous. He quickly asked, "Mom, what happened at home?" "Nothing happened? What happened at home?" Su Jinfeng asked back. "No, I'm going to faint. If there's nothing wrong, why are you so serious?" "I thought something big happened. That gave me a fright. I was feeding Kiki just now, so I didn't have time to answer the phone." Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I'm worried about you. Fruit, don't take the train these days." That, Brother Tai. What's the name of the news?" Yanghua could vaguely hear her father Yang Tai's gruff voice on the other end of the phone. "Train? What train? You didn't remember the train news said it so many times." Yes. I'm stupid. You're smart." Su Jinfeng scolded him, then turned back and said, "Fruit, yes, it's called a train. Don't take the train these days. The news is talking about it these days. It scared people to death. 2 big iron boxes collided and hundreds of people died." Su Jinfeng's words made Poplar Fruit feel that she was a little frightened. Poplar Fruit looked up and rolled his eyes. He was a little speechless. After a pause, he said, "Mom, did you see the train accident that happened last week?" "It happened a few days ago. The 2 trains collided for some reason. At that time, the internet was abuzz. How could Poplar Fruit not know?" Yes, that's right. That's it." Su Jinfeng said, "How long has it been since this happened? You're only telling me now. And it's not as scary as you said. Hundreds of people died. The statistics on the news are out. 40 people died." Poplar Fruit said helplessly, "Is 40 people a small number? Didn't you see that the car flipped over? How good can the people be?" Su Jinfeng said unhappily, "I know. I also saw the pictures of the scene. It's quite tragic. But you don't have to be too scared. This kind of thing doesn't happen every day. How can it be so coincidental?" Poplar Fruit said, "I think you're not alert at all." Su Jinfeng seriously criticized Poplar Fruit's careless attitude. "It'll be over when you encounter it. Do you know? Do you think such a big thing is a coincidence? It's all because of the negligence of the people in charge of the railway. They eat, drink, and play every day, squander the people's money, and play games at work. How can they be in the mood to work? You still want to hitch a ride with them and put your life in the hands of such people?" Su Jinfeng didn't know whether she had been watching too much news or too much TV drama recently. She even knew how to use idioms when she talked about things. Poplar Fruit was stunned by this long lecture. But how could it be Poplar Fruit's turn to care about national affairs? With such a big thing happening, the railway department must give the people an explanation. Didn't they see that the Prime Minister had already rushed to the scene? What Poplar Fruit had to do now was to appease the old lady's emotions. He said, "Mom, don't be angry. It's not that I don't listen to you. You see, recently, I've been staying at home all day to take care of Kiki. How can I have the chance to go outside and take the train? Right? I don't go anywhere to play." Su Jinfeng thought about it at this time. Her tone softened and she said, "It doesn't matter if you have or not. Anyway, you have to be careful. Let's not take such a dangerous train. It's not that fast. Go to the bus station and take 5 or 6 hours to get home." Yes, you're right," Poplar Fruit agreed. "By the way, what about the blind date last week? Tell me, how did it go wrong?" Su Jinfeng's tone changed. Poplar Fruit's head was about to explode. Why did they suddenly talk about his blind date? Poplar Fruit wailed in his heart, "Mom, I want to talk to you about current affairs and politics. Let's not change the topic so quickly, okay? Poplar Fruit braced himself and briefly explained the situation to his mother. Then, with a bitter face, he was bombarded by his mother's views on marriage for half an hour. Poplar Fruit's history of struggle from childhood to adulthood gave him a wealth of experience in dealing with his mother. In this kind of situation, it was absolutely impossible to talk back to his mother. Debating with Su Jinfeng, who was a teacher, was definitely an act of suicide. The solution could be summed up in one word: delay. Delay until his mother's mouth was dry. Delay until his mother's heart was blooming with joy. Delay until his mother was willing to put down the phone. In any case, after putting down the phone, Poplar Fruit could completely forget about what his mother said. He was far away in Yangcheng. The sky was high, and the emperor was far away. His mother could no longer interfere with what he did. After hanging up the phone, Poplar Fruit collapsed on the sofa as if he had been granted amnesty. He threw the hot phone far away. He was finally saved. Poplar Fruit turned his head to look at Kiki. He couldn't help but jump up again. Kiki, why did you put your finger in your mouth again? Poplar Fruit angrily pinched Kiki's little face. He pulled her right hand out again and held it down to prevent her from putting it back. No matter how unhappy Kiki was, Poplar Fruit refused to let go. In the afternoon, Poplar Fruit got out of bed and routinely logged on to the Ingyan website. He discovered that after a week, he had thought that there was no hope for the recruitment of translators for cult leader Qiao's biography. Poplar Fruit passed the first round of translation tests. Like the other 49 people who passed, he received an invitation for the second round of translation tests. Clap, clap, clap. Poplar Fruit pressed his knuckles together and pressed the button to accept the second round of translation tests with a face full of fighting spirit. The page jumped to a new document page. The second round of translation test was for cult leader Qiao's biography author, Walter Isaacson. Another selection of works by Walter Isaacson. Of course, it wasn't his more famous and best-selling books that had already been translated into Chinese. The Ingyan website wasn't stupid enough to take out Kissinger's biography, Benjamin Franklin, and Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin, An American's Life, Einstein, Life and the Universe, and other works for them to read. This selection came from an article that he published in one of the company's publications when he was the editor-in-chief of Time magazine. This publication wasn't popular in China, so naturally, not many people had read it. However, Poplar Fruit happened to be one of the few people who had read the original text. Some time ago, for this audition, after submitting the first round of translation, he searched for all of Isaacson's works on the internet. Poplar Fruit's original intention was to familiarize himself with Isaacson's writing style and some of his usual rhetorical techniques. He didn't expect to accidentally read this article on a website. Although Poplar Fruit only used English to understand the article, it didn't stop him from memorizing the entire article. When he saw this excerpt, Poplar Fruit immediately recalled the content of the full article. The next step was very simple. Poplar Fruit only needed to translate the understanding in his mind into Chinese, polish it a little, and the translation would be fresh out of the oven. It's not that difficult, Poplar Fruit thought as he sent the translation back. He raised his head and stretched lazily. Chapter 59. Turn it on. Turn it on. Song Jiwen said excitedly. Wait, there's another line, Poplar Fruit shouted. Poplar Fruit's study now had 3 desks. One was his desk, one was his computer desk, and the new one was Song Jiwen's computer desk, which he had just bought today. Song Jiwen's busy work had finally come to an end. For the past month, he had been burning the midnight oil even when he got home from work. All kinds of boring text materials were driving him crazy. It wasn't until he got off work last night that he rushed to Poplar Fruit's house and cried, "I'm finally free." Originally, he thought that since they lived opposite each other, they could play games together at night. He didn't expect that after living here for more than a month, let alone play games together. He didn't even have time to play on the computer. Song Ji-won's battle axe had been hungry for a long time. As soon as he had some free time, he immediately ran to the home market to buy a computer desk and placed it in Poplar Fruit's study. Then, he moved the desktop that was specially used to play games over. Song Ji-won said righteously, "From now on, this room will be our game room." Poplar Fruit's repeated protests were to no avail, so he had no choice but to change his sacred study. It wasn't a very big room to begin with. There were 3 bookshelves and 3 desks. Poplar Fruit felt that it was a bit crowded, but it was still acceptable. Anyway, as long as Song Ji-won didn't occupy his favorite windowsill, he didn't care about these details. Okay. Poplar Fruit clapped his hands and raised his head. Oh! Song Ji-won shouted as he pressed the power button. He sat in the comfortable, ergonomic gaming chair and rubbed his palms. "Help me turn it on." "I'll wash my hands," Poplar Fruit said. He went to the kitchen sink to wash his hands. After thinking about it, he took out the plums he bought in the morning from the fridge, poured them all on a plate, and washed them. The plums he bought today looked good. They were plump and round without any scars. The skin was crystal clear and deep wine red. There were some water droplets on them, which made them look even more delicate. "Olgwa, what are you doing? Hurry up, hurry up." Song Ji-won shouted impatiently. Coming. What are you shouting for?" Poplar Fruit carried a plate, a trash can, and a tissue box in the living room. Poplar Fruit placed the trash can between the two, and then put a large plate of plums on the joint of the 2 desks. It immediately attracted Song Ji-won's eyes. "What is it?" Song Ji-won turned around. "Wow, plums. Why didn't you bring such delicious food here earlier?" He immediately picked up a plum and took a bite. "Oh, it's delicious," Song Ji-won said vaguely. The plum in his hand had been bitten open, and the juice on its surface was about to drip. Poplar Fruit quickly handed him a tissue and pointed at the trash can. "Don't put it on the table." "There's a trash can here." He also ate one. It was sweet and sour. It was delicious. No matter how delicious the fruit was, it couldn't stop the two from playing the game. Soon, Poplar Fruit and Song Ji-won wiped their hands clean and entered the game. They were still in the first district of Shanghai. The two of them randomly picked a bomb room and entered it. The other modes were not as interesting as the bomb mode. Probably all the players who had played Counter-Strike would feel this way. The map was Power Station. There were no familiar IDs in the room. Poplar Fruit and Song Ji-won were born in a lurker's home. In this map, lurkers were not easy to deal with. This was because if they didn't know how to cooperate, it was easy to create a situation where several people were squeezed in the middle lane and sniped at each other. Poplar Fruit didn't care about the others. He said to Song Ji-won, "We're not in a hurry. Let's take it slow. Let's see how our teammates play first." Song Ji-won nodded. He took his AK to the small bridge and tried to shoot at the enemy in the Hidden Scriptures Pavilion. Poplar Fruit used the sniper. As he had guessed, there were 3 snipers in the middle lane. Including Poplar Fruit, there were 8 lurkers. How could they play? There was no space in the middle lane. Poplar Fruit had no choice but to run to the small bridge. At this time, Song Ji-won was exchanging fire with the enemy in the Hidden Scriptures Pavilion at the junction of the second building and the small bridge. Poplar Fruit dodged and fired. The enemy was hit in the chest and fell to the ground before they noticed. However, Poplar Fruit wasn't the first to kill an enemy. In the middle lane, they were the first to be attacked by the enemy. 3 snipers squeezed in the middle. The enemy sniper in the middle lane could hit someone with a random shot. Soon, they lost 2 people in a row. Poplar Fruit didn't have time to feel depressed. At this time, gunshots were heard in the middle lane. There was only one sentence left in his mind. "There's someone in Avenue B." He didn't need to look. In his mind, he guessed the enemy's movements based on the casualties on his side. The first flash came from Avenue B. 1 or 2 people rushed out and killed the lurkers who were squatting on the clothesline above the sewer and the 2 machine gunners near point B of the sewer. Then, they threw 2 grenades and killed the last lurker in the middle lane. In an instant, the situation changed. There were only 3 lurkers left, and there were still 7 defenders. What should he do? Poplar Fruit was very decisive. He immediately left the first building and ran from the small bridge to the second building. Then, he said to Song Jiwen, "Help me watch the people coming up the stairs." He sniped from the window of the second building. Sure enough, an enemy threw a flash from the stairs. However, it only landed on the second floor of the first building. It didn't affect Song Jiwen. When Song Jiwen saw the enemy appear, he clicked the mouse. The powerful firepower of his AK directly penetrated the wall of the stairs and turned the first enemy into a sieve. The people who were following behind quickly hid. As soon as Song Jiwen's gunfire stopped, Poplar Fruit saw a figure from the second-floor balcony. A defender wearing a black bulletproof vest only poked his head out of Poplar Fruit's scope before he was killed by Poplar Fruit. He probably wanted to throw a grenade from below to kill Song Jiwen. However, all of this was within Poplar Fruit's expectations. After killing this opponent, Poplar Fruit did not hesitate. He immediately turned his gun and aimed at the middle lane. Sure enough, an enemy from Avenue B crept out of the sewer and appeared with his back facing Poplar Fruit's scope. The last teammate who was stuck in the side lane of the second building did not let Poplar Fruit down. He killed the person who came out of point A. The situation changed dramatically once again. The original situation of 7 versus 3 defenders was reversed by Yang Guo and the others in less than 10 seconds. Now, it was 2 versus 3. Go to point A or point B? Song Jiwen shouted. Go to point A, Poplar Fruit said. He judged that there should be at least one enemy on the way to point B. The terrain of point B was more complicated. For the lurkers who had the advantage, going to point A was a better choice. Okay. Under Poplar Fruit's cover, Song Jiwen picked up the C4 from the middle lane and called for his teammate. The three of them formed a triangle and surrounded point A. After passing through the middle lane, Poplar Fruit went to point A2, Song Jiwen went to point A1, and another teammate came out from the side lane. The first to fire was Song Jiwen, who was carrying a backpack. He was very smart and did not continue to fight to the death. He fired while dodging, drawing the enemy's line of fire. Then, his teammate who jumped out from the side lane successfully finished the job. After searching, Song Jiwen dropped the backpack. Poplar Fruit was stuck in the corner of the connecting point with a sniper. The last Guardian did not take a detour. He directly rushed back from point B with a gun. In the end, he was killed by Poplar Fruit as soon as he poked his head out from point B. What's a reversal? This is a shocking reversal. Haha. A teammate on the lurker's side excitedly mocked in the public channel. As a result, a few people on the other side were not convinced and quarreled with him. Poplar Fruit and Song Jiwen were not so excited. The two of them silently high-fived each other and prepared for the next round. In the previous round, Poplar Fruit could clearly see the strength of the opponent. Indeed, there was no one with good marksmanship. The opponent's sniper in the middle lane was okay, but it was only okay. Compared to Poplar Fruit, he was still not good enough. In the second round, the two original snipers on the lurker's side wisely gave up. Instead, they switched to machine guns and followed the rest to point A. As a sniper, Poplar Fruit did not run too far ahead. After the rest of the team rushed past, he ran to the bottom of the library. He turned around and aimed at the intersection between Avenue B and the lurker's house. Almost everyone was shooting at point A, but there was still one sniper on the lurker's house. He stubbornly stood at the slope of the lurker's house and looked at Poplar Fruit foolishly through his scope. This made Poplar Fruit a little speechless. There were 5 defenders guarding point A. In the process of the charge, the lurkers also lost a lot of people. However, with the advantage of numbers, they took down point A with one less person sacrificed. Of course, the defenders at point B could not sit still. They rushed to point A when the gunshots were heard. One of them wanted to flank the lurkers, but from the middle lane. He rushed out of Avenue B and was shocked when he saw Poplar Fruit's teammate on the slope of the bandit's house. However, Poplar Fruit's teammate was also shocked. Not only was his first shot slow, but it also missed. The defender quickly moved, wanting to finish him off before Poplar Fruit's teammate's bullet could reach him. Before the defender's muzzle could adjust, he suddenly felt his body shake and slowly fell to the ground. Poplar Fruit calmly fired a shot and saved his cute teammate. 2 more left. Song Jiwon had already died. He looked at the view of his teammates on the screen and shouted, "There are 2 people at the connection point." Poplar Fruit did not hesitate. He immediately switched to a flash and threw it. He immediately switched back to the sniper rifle. As soon as the flash grenade exploded at point A2, he flashed out from the middle lane. There was no one in the middle lane, so he jumped from the corner of the wall to point A2. While he was in the air, he completed the 3 steps of scoping in, finding the enemy, and pulling the trigger. He killed one. The sniper rifle was still scoping in when a defender suddenly rushed out from the connection point. He was holding an M4A1 and was shooting at Poplar Fruit. The situation was extremely urgent. Poplar Fruit was shot in the foot and lost half of his health. He did not wait for the sniper rifle to return to its position. He decisively switched to the Desert Eagle and steadily fired a shot, hitting the defender right in the head. The defender fell on his back. His black muzzle spat out a string of flames along the wall and into the sky. Fortunately, there were no flying birds in this game. Otherwise, he might have been unlucky enough to be accidentally injured. After winning another game, the teammate who had been hooting earlier once again turned on the taunting mode and started to curse at the opponents. Poplar Fruit was helpless. He ignored them and focused on the game with Song Jiwon. This game was one-sided. Poplar Fruit and Song Jiwon led the lurkers and slaughtered the defenders. However, at this time, the victory or defeat did not seem to be important. The entire game's limelight was stolen by the taunting battle between Poplar Fruit's teammate and the defenders. In the last round, the defenders who were labeled as Si Longyu said indignantly, "Arrogant my ass. If you have the guts, play a game with our team." "Let's play. I'm not afraid of you." The teammate who had been taunting them for 100 years agreed. Chapter 60. Returning to the waiting screen, Poplar Fruit called out to Song Jiwon and said, "Mosquito, don't go. Let's continue playing. This kind of grudge game is the most interesting." Song Jiwon thought about it and understood. He smiled and said, "That's right. It's best if a few experts come." Soon, a lot of irrelevant people left their rooms. The teammate PS Frog, who had turned on the taunting mode, was very excited when he saw that Condor Hero and Spear Hero, who had played the best in the previous game, had stayed. He shouted at the other team in the room, warning them not to kick him out. "Who kicked people out? You can call anyone you want. Do you think we're afraid?" The other team replied coldly. AC Dragon changed to a new map, Desert Ash. This map was transplanted from Counter-Strike's Dust 2, so Poplar Fruit was very familiar with it. The scale of the battle changed to 5v5, with 7 rounds per round. They probably called for people in the team chat. Soon, a few people were replaced and a few unfamiliar IDs came in. There were 3 people who stayed in Poplar Fruit's room. PS Frog called another teammate, PS Fleeting Years, but the last empty seat was still empty. Every time someone came in, they would be scared away when they saw the same team IDs. After waiting for 2 minutes, Poplar Fruit's mouth was full of juice from eating plums. Finally, a person with the ID Big Dragon came in and did not leave. The game started. Poplar Fruit and Song Jiwon quickly wiped their hands, turned their heads, and prepared for battle. After the map was read, Poplar Fruit and the others appeared on the lurker's side. This time, only Poplar Fruit used a sniper rifle. PS Fleeting Years was not sure if PS Frog had told him that he used an M4A1. Big Dragon, on the other hand, was using a shotgun. This kind of gun was often seen in random games. He ran to the staircase of Cave B to ambush someone. Poplar Fruit had just started the game, and like most of the other players, he aimed his sniper rifle at the center door from the slope of the lurker's house. Suddenly, a figure flashed past. Poplar Fruit instinctively fired a shot, but he hit nothing. Poplar Fruit dodged to the side. Immediately, a bullet brushed past his shoulder and hit the wall behind him. Poplar Fruit frowned and shook his head. This shot was useless. The halftime break was too long, and his hands were a little cold. He gathered his spirit and seriously dealt with the enemy sniper in front of him. The middle gate was a process of taking the initiative. If one could control the middle gate first, they would be able to shoot before the other party. Then, the one who would fall would most likely be the enemy. Poplar Fruit had now lost the initiative because of his carelessness. Without looking, Poplar Fruit knew that the other party had already stood firm and was waiting for him with a sniper rifle. Knowing that there was a tiger in the mountain, he still walked towards it. As a sniper, Poplar Fruit maintained absolute confidence in his own strength. So what if you have the initiative? I'm still going to kill you. Poplar Fruit thought to himself. At this time, Song Jiwon and the two PS players tried to attack University A, but the two opponents were indeed from the same team. They cooperated very well, and with high explosive and flash, Song Jiwon's team lost a player and fled in a sorry state. Poplar Fruit gently revealed half of his body, and then immediately dodged back. The enemy's bullets came as expected, but Poplar Fruit did not stop. He jumped out, and the moment he landed, he scoped in and pulled the trigger. Before the enemy could dodge, he sniped him. Well done, Song Jiwon shouted. The frustration of being trapped in room A by grenades and random gunfire suddenly disappeared. Poplar Fruit smiled slightly and said to Song Jiwon, "You guys go from path A. I'll watch gate A. You guys go from path A or path B according to the situation." Before he finished speaking, on the right side of the screen, it showed that Great Dragon, who was hiding near the stairs of hole B, had killed a defender who had peeked out from point B. The advantage suddenly came. Break through the middle and hit path B, Song Jiwon said decisively. Poplar Fruit agreed, but he did not move with the rest of the team. He jumped to point L in the middle, hid half of his body, and aimed his sniper rifle at path A. He guessed that the two defenders at point A would split up, and one of them would jump from path A to hole B and go around to point B. The enemy only had one defender left at point B. PS Fleeting Years entered point B from dog B in the middle, while Song Jiwon went up from hole B and rushed to point B. Although they had never worked together before, the two of them relied on their little bit of tacit understanding to disarm the enemy at point B. This time, Poplar Fruit guessed wrongly. The enemy did not come out from path A, but from gate A. As soon as he came out, he noticed Poplar Fruit's figure and immediately turned his gun to fire at him. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit caught a glimpse of a shadow from the corner of his eye. Before the enemy's bullets could reach him, he quickly hid in the fishbowl path under the slope of the lurker and began to lead the enemy in circles. This was a psychological game. Poplar Fruit was very cunning. He had no intention of killing the enemy himself and using his M4A1 to fight at close range. After fooling the enemy for a while, he jumped up the slope and ran toward the back garden of point B. At this time, Big Dragon had unknowingly run behind the middle gate. A defender carefully ran from point A to the defender's spawn point. Then, he raised his gun and watched his dog be walked forward quietly. He just happened to fall into Big Dragon's trap and was killed with 2 shots. Fuck, you have a shady dog. The enemy complained on the public channel. Big Dragon did not respond, but PS Frog was not to be outdone and immediately started arguing with the enemy. There was only one player left on the enemy's side. The defender played very carefully. Although he managed to stay alive, he did not do anything until the C4 exploded. When the second round began, Poplar Fruit knew that it was going to be a one-sided battle. This time, he found his rhythm. At the middle gate, he only used 2 bullets to take out the enemy sniper. The enemy who wanted to jump over to defend point B was also killed. After losing 2 players at the beginning of the game, the enemy could no longer form an effective defense. The weak defense line at point B was immediately broken into pieces by Song Jiwon and the others. After winning all 7 rounds, Poplar Fruit and the others had once again cleanly taken down the enemy. However, the results of the lurkers surprised Poplar Fruit. He was in first place, but the second place was actually Big Dragon, who had been sneakily shooting at their opponents the entire game. The others, including Song Ji-win, had only killed a few enemies. The results were divided between Poplar Fruit and Big Dragon. PS Frog happily continued to mock the enemy, saying that the enemy's team was trash and that they could not even beat a random team. The enemy was unconvinced and said, "Fuck, what's the big deal if you can beat us? If you have the guts, fight with our main force. If you don't dare to fight, then don't talk nonsense." For the first time, Poplar Fruit typed in the public channel, "Call your main force over." Yanghua's words immediately ignited the passion of both sides. Even Great Dragon, who had been silent all this time, was a little excited and shouted, "That's right, let's see who's good." Under such provocation, the members of AC Dragon could not take it lying down. They called their team's experts one after another. Their IDs all started with the letters AC. After seeing the opponent's IDs, even PS Frog could not remain calm. He typed in the team channel, "Fuck, we've gone too far this time." PS Fleeting Time also typed, "AC Fox, the sniper god of our district's amateur league last year. There's also AC Akatsuki and AC Labyrinth. They're all AC Team's main force." "They think too highly of us," said PS Frog. "Three gods, two experts." Song Jiwin did not understand, but he asked, "Are they really that good?" He and Poplar Fruit did not care about the game's information, so they had never heard of these people. "Of course they're good," PS Frog said excitedly. AC Team was the runner-up of the Shanghai District 1 Amateur League last year. All three of their players are here. What do you think? Not to mention a god like Fox. Some people say that even professional teams may not be as good as him. "They're not as scary as you say," said Big Dragon, who had been watching from the sidelines. AC Team is only at the amateur level, but their cooperation is still a little good. Fox's strength is not to be underestimated, but he's still a little lacking compared to the experts of professional teams. What's there to be afraid of? It's just a game. It's rare to have a match like this, so there's no need to worry too much about winning or losing. Poplar Fruit concluded. "Okay, then let's fight it out with them," said PS Frog, who was the most easily excited. PS Fleeting Time also shouted, and everyone's enthusiasm was aroused. Before the game started, Poplar Fruit smiled and typed, "Big Dragon, are you still going to use a shotgun later?" Big Dragon replied, "Why would I? It's such a big event, of course I wouldn't dare to play casually." "Then I'm relieved," said the talkative PS Frog. He stole what Poplar Fruit wanted to say. "What are you going to use later?" "I'll use an AK. The Condor heroes are very good at sniping, so I won't embarrass myself, haha. Are you guys on Crooked?" PS Fleeting Time asked, "I think it's more convenient for everyone to communicate in the same channel, so let's report something." Under his organization, Poplar Fruit and the others went on Crooked and entered the channel that PS Fleeting Time had temporarily opened. After going on Crooked, Poplar Fruit heard the voices of PS Frog and PS Fleeting Time. It sounded like they were underage children, so it was no wonder they were so easily excited. Big Dragon had a more mature voice, and it sounded a little magnetic. After a while, the two sides discussed the strategy for this grudge match, 5v5. In the first half, AC Long Yu would be the lurker, and in the second half, it would be Poplar Fruit's turn. There would be 5 matches in each half, and the map was still the same Desert Ash. Without further ado, they entered the game. When the countdown ended, Poplar Fruit took the lead and went to the middle lane to snipe at AC Fox. Perhaps it was because Yanghua wasn't used to the change from a lurker to a defender. He made a mistake and didn't stand in the right position. Before he could open his scope, a bullet pierced through the door and into his body. "Fuck, bad start," Poplar Fruit thought gloomily. Song Jiwin was also careless, and when he jumped over the middle gate, he was sniped by AC Fox. The first round was the same as the second round of the previous round, but this time it was Poplar Fruit's team that was unlucky. PS Frog called out in Crooked, "Big Brother Condor, why don't we smoke the middle lane? Fox sniping is too hard to deal with." "No need, trust me," Poplar Fruit said confidently. "When enemies meet on a narrow path, the brave will win." If he backed down and did not dare to fight AC Fox, then he would have to back down again and again when he faced the other strong players of AC Long Live. Yanghua tightened his grip on the mouse as he looked at the screen confidently and said in his heart, "Victory will start with me." Chapter 61. In the desert town, the houses and the ground were almost all grayish-yellow like sand. Even the sky looked so lonely. In a world without wind, it was so dull that even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard clearly. However, the deathly silence at this moment was just the prelude to the explosion of a hail of bullets. 5, 4, 3. As the countdown on the screen flashed, Poplar Fruit's breathing became a little rapid. 1. The battle was about to start. Song Jiwin's spawn point was closer to point B, so he took the lead and jumped over first. Poplar Fruit didn't run behind him. Instead, he took a few steps back in the direction of the big crate and went up a small slope. Taking a deep breath, Poplar Fruit counted in his mind. 1, 2, 3. He dashed out and pulled the trigger. The scope opened and disappeared at a speed invisible to the naked eye. It was such a quick scope that Fox didn't even have half a second to react. The top of the screen showed that Hero Condor had killed AC Fox with a sniper rifle. Poplar Fruit breathed a sigh of relief and smiled slightly. The confidence on his face was even stronger. The two PS players' cheers came through the earpiece. They were yelling and shouting, extremely happy. But at this moment, Song Jiwin yelled into the microphone, "Stop messing around. There are 4 people at point B." The opponent was currently attacking point B with all their strength. Fox's death was a huge shock to them. For a moment, they were in a mess. 3 of them were seriously injured by Song Jiwin's grenade. However, Song Jiwin couldn't block the opponent's random gunfire. He was taken away by the opponent through the crate. Poplar Fruit didn't even think about it. He threw a high-explosive grenade outside point B. It exploded in the crowd and 2 lurkers were blown away. 2 more. Song Jiwin shouted. The 2 PS players came to the rescue. Poplar Fruit retreated to the spawn point of the defenders and aimed at Boss B from afar. On the other hand, Great Dragon jumped down from Path A and killed a lurker who wanted to rush out from the middle. The remaining heavily injured lurker didn't even have time to unpack his backpack before he was quickly killed by the 2 PS players. After winning this round, the defenders' morale was greatly boosted. The third round began with the match between Poplar Fruit and Fox. Ever since he was caught off guard by Poplar Fruit in the last round, Fox became more vigilant. He no longer stood still and covered the middle lane. Instead, he began to move around randomly. Poplar Fruit was also well-versed in this. He moved behind the center door and took advantage of the opening to fire. However, Fox was an expert sniper, and Poplar Fruit's reaction speed was extremely fast. The 2 fired a few shots at each other, but all of them missed. For a moment, Fox had no choice but to continue dealing with Poplar Fruit. Just because he couldn't do anything, it didn't mean that Poplar Fruit couldn't do anything to him. Poplar Fruit smiled in his heart. "You want an opening, right? Then I'll give you one." After the next shot, Poplar Fruit didn't immediately dodge after switching weapons like before. Instead, he paused on the spot. When Fox saw this, he thought that Poplar Fruit committed the biggest taboo of a sniper, standing on the spot and waiting for the scope to open again. He didn't hesitate at all. He immediately stopped and opened fire with his blink mirror. Just as he opened his blink mirror for a fraction of a second, he realized that Poplar Fruit, who should have been in his field of vision, had disappeared. A few words flashed in his heart. "I fell into a trap." That's right. Poplar Fruit only stood on the spot for less than a second before he moved sideways. The moment Fox pulled the trigger, Poplar Fruit also stood outside of his scope and opened fire. Fox didn't have time to pull back his gun to dodge. He only felt his body shake. He was shot. Who is it? He's so strong. In a rented apartment in Magic City, A young man in his early 20s took off his headphones. He looked at the darkened screen in disbelief. He clicked on the tab to look at his opponent. An unknown ID? After this round, the opponent lost another member and couldn't complete a comeback. In the end, the defenders stubbornly defended. In this battle, Poplar Fruit killed 2 people with his sniper rifle. Song Ji-win killed 1, Big Dragon killed 1, and PS Frog killed 1. It was 2-1 now. They went from being behind to overtaking. The defenders' morale was high. In the 4th round, Poplar Fruit was jumping around the middle door. However, he didn't see Fox come out to snipe him. Scared? Poplar Fruit laughed in his heart. Of course, Fox wasn't scared. After playing with sniper rifles to his level, he wouldn't have the word scared in his heart. However, as a sniper in an amateur team who had played in competitions, he understood that this wasn't the time for one person to show off. After all, CF was still a team game. Under his command, the lurkers carried 3 and 2 of A's while he, AC Akatsuki, and AC Maze, the 3 best shooters in flash smoke, rushed out from A's door. The 2 PS Frog players couldn't block them at all. They were killed before they even saw anyone. There were still 2 players from AC team holding back Big Dragon on the platform. Fox fired a shot from afar and finished him off. The last defender at A's door was cleared. AC Akatsuki ran towards A's platform first. Poplar Fruit wouldn't let him pass so easily. Even though AC Akatsuki jumped and changed speed, Poplar Fruit only flicked his mouse and fired before the crosshair on the screen was even aimed at him. The bullet flew out and AC Akatsuki, who had jumped into the air, fell to the ground. Yang Guo was aiming at where he was going to make his next move. Fox realized that something was wrong and hurriedly called for his teammates to smoke up. White smoke filled the entire A's platform. Poplar Fruit had no choice but to let them pass. At this time, Song Ji-win, who had just walked out of B's entrance, had bad news. He had just revealed his foot and was killed by a lurker waiting on the side path. After entering the encirclement, Poplar Fruit had a 1v4. Even though he bravely killed a lurker who jumped down from the middle lane, he couldn't escape from Fox's soul-chasing sniper. 2-2. It was a tie again. This time, Poplar Fruit and the others saw the coordination of the team that had taken second place in the amateur league. PS Frog still described the scene of them being broken through with fear. 2 flashes flew out at the same time. One exploded on A's platform, while the other exploded above WC. He, who was crouching at WC, and PS Fleeting Time, who was crossing defense with him on A's platform, were blinded by the flashes. Before they could see the enemy, they were finished off by AC Akatsuki and AC Maze. The opponent's coordination was good, so it wasn't suitable for them to defend at the front. Poplar Fruit thought for a moment and had them change their formation again. One person would stand at A's entrance. If someone rushed in, he would throw a grenade and then retreat. One person would stand at A's platform and A's slope. They could watch the side paths and support A's main road. But this time, Team AC didn't follow the strategy they used so well last time. They threw 2 grenades from A's side to feign an attack. Then, they used a 3v2 formation to surround B's point. Poplar Fruit, who was caught off guard, finished off one person, but he was still shot full of holes by the lurkers who rushed up from behind. Song Ji-win couldn't hold on either and was quickly wiped out. This round, the defenders lost again. After losing 2 rounds in a row, PS Frog started to feel a little nervous. Poplar Fruit encouraged him and then had his teammates change their positions again. He had Big Dragon, who had better marksmanship, stand at A's position so that he could provide support at any time. After being rushed by Team AC for 2 rounds in a row, Poplar Fruit was a little unhappy. He waited for the countdown to end and then jumped to the right of the middle gate. He stood on B's slope and aimed his gun at A's small path. Since you like to walk A's small path so much, I'll let you understand. Poplar Fruit stared at the small path's entrance. 1. Poplar Fruit saw a figure appear and swung his mouse. With a bang, the enemy fell to the ground. 2. Poplar Fruit counted silently. The second lurker appeared in his field of vision and was about to sweep over with his AK, but Poplar Fruit's gun was faster. After he pulled the trigger, Poplar Fruit put away his gun and changed to a high-explosive grenade. He rushed into B's gate and threw it into B's hole. Fuck! Seeing a black object flying towards him, Fox quickly swung his knife and jumped back, but it was too late. The high-explosive grenade exploded beside him. He, who had already been shot a few times by Song Jiwin's AK, was blown away. The score of both sides was tied again. Team AC, who was ranked second among the amateur teams in Shanghai District 1, didn't expect that a grudge match that they thought was just some passers-by's provocation would end up in such a stalemate. Fox gritted his teeth and gave his teammates a new strategy through his headset. A new round began. Poplar Fruit realized in the middle lane that the middle gate had been completely blocked by 2 smoke grenades. He looked out from the middle gate. It was all white, and he couldn't see anyone at all. At this time, concentrated gunshots came from A's small path. They had actually rushed out of A's small path with a smoke grenade. This time, AC Akatsuki and AC Maze were mainly attacking the small path. A's small path wasn't peaceful either. The PS Frog in A's small path was already calling for help. He couldn't hold on much longer. Not good. Poplar Fruit gritted his teeth and ordered his teammates to try their best to stall for more time. Then, Poplar Fruit let Song Jiwin switch to the middle lane. He hurriedly went around B's small path. Just as he ran into B's small path, A's small path was officially breached. The opponent had actually taken down A's small path without losing a single person. Song Jiwin ran out from the middle gate. Just as he passed through the smoke, his body suddenly shook and he fell on his back. He grabbed his headset and shouted at Poplar Fruit, "They still have a sniper in their house." Poplar Fruit's eyes widened. He ran from B's small path to the lurker's back garden. He didn't dare to leave any footsteps behind. He crouched and jumped all the way. Just as he went up the slope, Poplar Fruit caught a glimpse of a person in front of him. He quickly crouched down. With a swoosh, a bullet flew over his head. As expected of the amateur sniper god in Shanghai's 1st District, Fox, he actually realized that Poplar Fruit was flanking him. At this time, the wails of PS Frog could be heard from Poplar Fruit's headset. He was the last remaining teammate at A's small path. Although he hid in the toilet and stubbornly resisted, he still couldn't escape the fate of being annihilated. "Shut up," Song Jiwin shouted in his headset. At this time, Poplar Fruit was at his most dangerous moment. After seeing this, his teammates all held their breaths, not daring to affect Poplar Fruit's judgment. Poplar Fruit didn't hide like a coward. At this time, he should be the one who was anxious. He couldn't be held back by Fox any longer. He suddenly flashed out from behind the wall of the slope. A series of picturesque yet extremely strange movements. Not only did Fox miss his first shot, but his Desert Eagle also missed Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit wouldn't give him another chance. He suddenly stopped and raised his gun. With a flash of the scope and a pull of the trigger, Fox was sent flying by the powerful firepower of the sniper rifle. Poplar Fruit didn't have time to appreciate the results of his battle. He spread his legs and rushed to A's door. Over at the lurker's side, Fox yelled at his teammates, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and take cover. Look at the small path." "No, we have to split up to look at A's door too." Poplar Fruit had just stepped into A's door when he received a notification. They had taken cover. There were still 45 seconds before the explosion, but Poplar Fruit needed 5 seconds to dismantle it. Therefore, there were only 30 seconds left for Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit didn't hesitate. He threw out a flash and jumped out decisively. The afterglow of the flash hadn't dissipated yet, and even he was dazzled for a moment. Poplar Fruit fired before he landed, taking out an enemy guarding the door on A's Avenue. Countdown. 40 seconds. Hurry up. Poplar Fruit roared in his heart. At this moment, it was as if he was possessed by a god. He had just jumped from the side of the wall into A's Avenue. In the air, he used a flash snipe. AC Labyrinth didn't even see him clearly before he was shot. Countdown. 36 seconds. Is this guy cheating? AC Labyrinth shouted in their headset. Fox said angrily, Don't shoot at each other. We still have 2 people. Don't be afraid. We'll drag it out until he dies. This was the difference between an amateur team that had played in a competition and a random team. They didn't care about individual results and only pursued the final result. AC Akatsuki and his other teammate obediently hid behind the crates on A's platform and behind the small staircase. They were cowards. As a sniper, Poplar Fruit really couldn't do anything to them. He didn't dare to cross Company A's platform because he would be shot down by their crossfire. Even if he was a god, he wouldn't be able to use a sniper rifle to deal with 2 enemies on his left and right at the same time. What to do? Time passed second by second. There were only 23 seconds left. He couldn't hesitate. Poplar Fruit took out a high explosive, bit off the tab, and threw it towards AC Akatsuki's hiding place on A's platform. AC Akatsuki saw the bomb flying towards him and instinctively jumped to the side. In his headset, Fox yelled bitterly, Don't. I've been waiting for you to come out. Poplar Fruit's gun barrel drifted and chased after AC Akatsuki's half-exposed body like a shadow. He silently said, Goodbye. AC Akatsuki fell. Countdown. 15 seconds. Poplar Fruit didn't hesitate. He jumped onto the platform, took out the last item, and threw it towards the small staircase. The staircase immediately filled with smoke. Countdown. 11 seconds. Poplar Fruit immediately crouched down and pressed the unpack button. The 2 teams who were closely watching the battle could clearly hear the sound of unpacking coming from their headsets. Wait, Fox yelled in his headset. He wished he could switch places with him right now. The last lurker crouched down in the smoke for 2 seconds. He couldn't hold it in anymore and yelled, No, I've already unpacked. After saying that, he ran out of the smoke. But what greeted him was a huge bullet. Even though Poplar Fruit was unpacking, his eyes were focused on the smoke. The moment he saw a gun barrel sticking out, he immediately stopped what he was doing and took a shot with his sniper rifle. The lurkers were wiped out. Countdown. 7 seconds. Poplar Fruit crouched down and started unpacking again. He smiled slightly. He had a pair of pliers. 7 seconds was enough. In this battle, Poplar Fruit had single-handedly wiped out the 5 members of AC team and unpacked them at the last second. With such a result, no one could remain calm. Even Big Dragon, who hadn't spoken much all this time, couldn't suppress his excitement. He cheered and howled along with everyone else. After this battle, AC team's morale had completely plummeted. Indeed, having the tables turned was a huge blow to their morale. In the next few rounds, Poplar Fruit's team won. In the end, they didn't even fight in the second half and ran away with their tails between their legs. After this grudge match, Poplar Fruit and Song Jiwin logged out of the game and went back to sleep. Poplar Fruit slept soundly. He didn't know that this match had caused a huge commotion among the amateur and professional players in Frontline. But this was all in the future. Chapter 62. The blazing sun scorched the earth, but there was no crowd on the spacious sidewalk. There were only groups of 2 or 3, holding umbrellas and sweating profusely as they walked quickly on the white bricks, or wiping the sweat from their foreheads and hiding in the shadow of the bus stop, hoping that the bus that was like a big iron can would arrive soon. Although it was still not easy to squeeze like sardines after getting on the bus, at least there was a cool breeze blowing on the bus. A taxi drove over and stopped at the side of the road. Poplar Fruit opened the door, opened the umbrella, and carried Kiki out. The driver opened the front window near the side of the road and pointed outside to Poplar Fruit, saying, "Just go down this road." Poplar Fruit looked and smiled. "Okay, thank you, sir." He pulled out the folded baby trolley from the car and then locked the door. The taxi drove away, and Poplar Fruit opened the baby trolley with the umbrella. After carrying Kiki inside, he pulled down the roof, like a big lid covering the whole car. At this time, Poplar Fruit pushed the trolley down the road with satisfaction. After walking a few dozen meters into the small road, Poplar Fruit was surprised to find that it was a new world. On the bluestone steps and ordinary alleys, although there was no gurgling water or beautiful women holding oil paper umbrellas, there were towering trees in every courtyard. The canopies of the trees were like imperial canopies, blocking the sun and leaving behind a cool breeze. The rich greenery and mottled spots of light intertwined to form a quiet and elegant picture. Most of the people walking here were old, but they still looked dignified and well-dressed. Some of them seemed to be good friends for many years, and when they met on the road, they warmly greeted each other. Some of them walked slowly, but with a happy expression, not anxious at all. This was a small alley that was different from the fast-paced metropolis of Yangcheng. For such a leisurely and elegant place, Yanghua felt as if she had transmigrated to the Jiangnan water town filled with a scholarly atmosphere. But if he listened carefully, the unique charm of Cantonese and the rhythm of Jiangnan's Wunong dialect was completely absent. Only at this time could Poplar Fruit be sure that he was not lost. 200 meters forward, Poplar Fruit saw his destination this time, Mudu Tea House. The tea house was decorated in an antique style, and it was entirely made of wood. Even the plaque was written with 4 traditional Chinese characters, Mudu Liuxiang. From afar, there were some old traces of smoke and fire, and it seemed to be quite old. Poplar Fruit, who had read a lot of books, had some understanding of the 2 words Mudu. Mudu was the name of an ancient town. At the end of the spring and autumn period, King Fuchai of Wu, in order to win the favor of Beauty Shishir, deliberately built a large number of buildings on Lingyan Mountain. Wood was transported from all directions, and the river port at the foot of the mountain was blocked. Therefore, there was the illusion of Block Mudu, and the name of the town came from that. Poplar Fruit guessed that the 2 words, Liuxiang, should be related to Beauty Shishir. Did it mean that when the tea was opened, the beauty would leave a fragrance? Using this name, perhaps the owner of the tea house had some relationship with the ancient town that was the most beautiful in Jiangnan. The steps were made of square stones and decorated with soft moss. Although it was a little wet, it did not make people feel that it was slippery. The old men who came from all directions lifted their trousers and walked up the 8 steps with small, light steps. They were all smiling, as if they had returned to their hometown. Poplar Fruit picked up Kiki and carried the baby stroller with one hand. He walked up the steps, put her back in the stroller, and pushed her into the tea house. Just as he crossed the threshold, a waiter, no, it should be called a waiter here, greeted him with a smile. He was wearing a green robe, with a towel on his shoulder. He bent down and stretched out his hand to greet him. Sir, please come in. Poplar Fruit nodded. As he walked forward, he secretly praised the service of this tea house. He asked, Sir, how many people are there? Did you reserve a table in advance? I'm looking for Mr. Yao Dahua. Has he arrived yet? Poplar Fruit said. Today, he came to the tea house not because Lu Suqin had arranged a blind date for him, but because Yao Daihua, the vice president of Xinda Company, had called him to talk about something. Poplar Fruit felt that this matter was very fresh. He originally thought that Xinda Company would always be hidden behind the internet and only be a platform for translators and mercenaries to issue tasks. Since the boss of the place where he earned money sincerely invited him, Poplar Fruit also readily agreed. So today's trip was made. Mr. Yao has arrived. Sir, please follow me. The waiter smiled and led the way in front. On the second floor, near the railing, a middle-aged fat man with a Mediterranean hairstyle saw them. He stood up with a smile and stretched out his hand to Poplar Fruit, saying, You must be Mr. Yang from Poplar Fruit. Hello, I'm Yao Daihua. President Yao, hello? Although he didn't know the purpose of Yao Daihua's visit, Poplar Fruit's first impression of Yao Daihua was still good. As the vice president of a big company, it was rare for him to be so polite. Poplar Fruit also smiled and walked forward to shake hands with him. Yao Daihua invited Poplar Fruit to sit down and ordered tea and snacks from the waiter. After sending the waiter away, he smiled at Poplar Fruit and said, Mr. Yang, I guess you must be very confused as to why I invited you to come out and meet me? Poplar Fruit nodded. Before that, I want to briefly introduce myself to you, Yao Daihua said, you should know my position. I'm currently the vice president of Shinda Group, and the president is my brother. Shinda Group can be said to be a family business, and I also have a certain amount of shares in the company. Shinda's translation market can be said to be opened up by me, and I've also been managing it for the past few years. And after more than 10 years of development, we are preparing to establish Shinda Translation Company in the second half of this year as an independent subsidiary of Shinda Group. In the future, the translation market will be handed over to Shinda Translation Company. Shinda Group will no longer interfere with the management and strategy of the new company, and I will also become the president of the new company. Poplar Fruit looked at him in confusion. Why is he telling me this? Poplar Fruit could only smile and say, "Congratulations, Mr. Yao." Haha, don't think that what I said has nothing to do with you. Yao Dehua laughed, and he briefly explained to Poplar Fruit that Poplar Fruit came out of nowhere to help him complete the military order. Because of Poplar Fruit, he won time to expand the translation market outside of Guangdong province. Poplar Fruit, indeed, played a big role in the successful establishment of Shinda Translation Company. Poplar Fruit asked strangely, "Mr. Yao, you didn't come here specifically to thank me, right? I really can't accept this. To be able to help you, it can only be said that it was unintentional. But you don't know, at that time. If it weren't for you finding a place to make money, both of us would have run out of ammunition and food. Speaking of which, we still have to thank you. Mr. Yang, you are really worthy of your background in foreign trade. You have a glib tongue. Since that's the case, there's no need to talk about gratitude. I will remember this kindness in my heart, haha. We can be considered to be fated. Let's have a drink and try the tea of this tea house. This is a wonderful place that even the people of Laoyang City might not know about." Yao Dehua laughed. Poplar Fruit picked up the teacup and drank a mouthful of tea. When it entered his mouth, he felt a rich fragrance. The tea was sweet and refreshing. It was indeed a treasure that couldn't be drunk in an ordinary club. No wonder a big boss like Yao Dehua would choose this place to meet him. It's really good. This tea, is it Biluakun? Poplar Fruit said in surprise. Haha, so Mr. Yang is also someone who understands tea. You can taste it with just a sip. That's right. This is the authentic Dongting Biluakun. Even the water used to make this tea was collected from a spring on Bayun Mountain in the morning. Yao Dehua was happy to meet a bosom friend. He introduced the tea to Poplar Fruit in detail. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Mr. Yao, since we are so congenial, you don't have to call me Mr. Yang. Just call me Poplar Fruit or Little Yang." "All right, then I will call you Little Yang. You don't have to call me Mr. Yao. How distant is that? Just call me Big Brother Yao." Yao Dehua laughed. "Big Brother Yao." Poplar Fruit responded, "Since you called me Big Brother Yao, I won't beat around the bush with you. I also like to speak straightforwardly. This time, I came here mainly to invite you to join my new company." Yao Dehua said straightforwardly. In fact, Yao Dehua had the idea of inviting Poplar Fruit to join a long time ago. However, at that time, he had been busy with the market outside of Guangdong province. The company's several gold medal interpreters were enough, so it was temporarily put aside. In the past few weeks, he had already arranged the entire chessboard. All that was left was the final activation and the cruel competition in the market. At this time, he received a report from the translation department. Poplar Fruit, who was currently the company's strongest gold medal interpreter, had a new situation. He actually started the task of translating French and German. Most of the people who learned languages could master more than one foreign language. The same was true for several gold medal interpreters in the translation department. In addition to English, they also mastered other languages. However, there were specializations in the industry. This sentence was not wrong. Except for Wu Ping's, the level of the other people's second foreign language could only reach the silver medal level. Therefore, in the translation department, there were also gold medal interpreters in charge of each small language. However, there were relatively few talents in the small language field. According to the feedback of the gold medal interpreters who reviewed Poplar Fruit, they actually expressed admiration for Poplar Fruit's translation. It could be seen that Poplar Fruit's level in French and German was also excellent, not only in the field of English, but also in the field of two small languages, but also at such a young age. Yao Dehua was almost destined to become a grandmaster in the future. How could Yao Dehua still sit on the fishing platform calmly? Even if he was rich, Yao Dehua was willing to put down his status to make friends with Yang Guo. Of course, it would be even better if he could recruit Yang Guo under his wing before the master grew up. Yao Dehua's offer to Poplar Fruit was also very generous. The position of deputy manager of the translation department of the new company, in charge of all the interpreters in the small language field, with an annual salary of 600,000 yuan. It should be understood that the annual salary mentioned here was paid by the company. The money that Poplar Fruit earned from doing tasks was not included in the annual salary. In other words, as long as Poplar Fruit did the daily management work, and sometimes the gold medal interpreter review and training work, he could use his working hours to earn more money. Yao Dehua also explained to Poplar Fruit that the reason why he only gave Wu Ping's the position of deputy manager was mainly because of Wu Ping's seniority in the company. Poplar Fruit had just come in, so Yao Dehua could not give him a higher position than Wu Ping's. However, he promised that if Poplar Fruit could make greater contributions in the rapid development of the company, he would definitely become the head of the translation department in the future. After saying what needed to be said, Yao Dehua looked at Poplar Fruit expectantly. His eyes were filled with nervousness and expectation. He held the cup of tea in his hand for a long time. The tea was cold, but he had no intention of drinking it. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.